Hello, my name is Kris Nelson of evolveconsciousness.org, and this will be a presentation on natural law, the science of morality, part 2, slavery. The previous part 1, was on rights, and this is the second part of a continuation of presenting information about natural law, and I'll probably have 6, 7, or 8 parts eventually in total. Yeah, that's about what I estimate. So let's get into it. Questions to ponder. Do you care at all about initiating harm, doing a wrong to others, of being a bad person that does a wrong? Is it possible that you could be doing something wrong and not actually be aware of it? Would you want to know? Do you just want to believe whatever you want to believe, even if you are doing something wrong and don't know it? Did all the German people who went along with Hitler's agenda know they were doing immoral actions? Did all the Russians with Lenin and Stalin? Did all the Chinese with Mao? How do you know if something you do is morally right or wrong? Do you even have accurate definitions to truly know this? Or do you just believe you know? Do you think authority, to rule others, give orders, and enforce obedience is something good to have as a way of life? Do you think it's necessary? And if you don't know the difference between right and wrong, you should go check out the first part of the Natural Law, Science of Morality series of presentations. Part 1 is about rights, and in there you will learn what is morally right and what is morally wrong. So, how do most people view slavery? Well, this is how most people view slavery. This is the overt chattel slavery that most people associate with the term slavery. The visibility is high. It's overt, in your face. There's chains or ropes to bond people, and there's markets to sell people. The social recognition is also high. It's openly accepted. The word slavery is a term that's used for an actual aspect of society. So people are openly using the term slavery to refer to something in society. There is a belief in the legitimacy to outright own or rule others. The legal status is that it is legal, that it's a legal, quote, right to own or rule others. And they deny natural rights and natural law. What's the status of slaves' property? Well, 100% of the fruits of labor are taken by threat of greater force. So these are the visuals that people think of when they hear the word slavery. Not only do they think of this, but this is only what they think of. There is no other form of slavery that they conceive of. This is all there is. This type of treatment of others is what equates to slavery in their mind's eye. So they can't envision or imagine anything else as being slavery because only this is what defines slavery. But as it says at the bottom, is this alone what slavery is? When is slavery not slavery? When is slavery no longer slavery? When are actions that enslave no longer slavery? Do I have the right to take all, 100% of your earnings, of what you own? Well, that's considered outright, overt, standard slavery to have that imposed on you. So the answer would be no. Most people would say, no. I don't have, and neither does anyone else have the right to take 100% of everything. Well, what about the right to take 99%, 90%, 50%, 10%, 1%, 0.1%? That's still not a right. What's the difference between 100%, 99%, or 0.1%? A matter of degree, intensity, or severity. But the same condition is created. Do I have the right to prevent you from doing things that don't initiate harm to others? Do I have the right to tell you that you need to ask or beg me for permission to do certain things, and further, that you need to pay me to get that permission? Do I have the right to restrict your movement if you don't do as I say? Who does have that right? A group of people? Do we have equal rights in nature or not? Rulers, more rights than others. Do what I say or else. That's the mindset we have when we're talking about rulers. So imagine humanity being wiped out and it's just you and one other person. You find a cigarette or some cannabis or whatever substance and you decide to smoke it or ingest it. The other person says you can't for whatever reason they come up with. Says it's bad for your health or some other reason. Whatever the reason, it doesn't matter. They say they get to decide what you can or can't do. They get to decide what your rights are or not. They even say that they have the, quote, right to put you in a cage for some time if you disobey them. Or you can, quote, give them some property that they value to avoid it. Because you're not actually giving it, right? That's why I put it in quotes. Because you're not actually giving it. You're being coerced into giving it so that you don't receive something worse. Would you accept living like this if it was just you and one other person? Someone pretends to have rights that you don't and to have, quote, authority over you. If you aren't equal in rights and someone else has more rights than you to rule over you, what does that make you? The moment some people declare or convince others that they have more rights than others, either permanently, like a dictator, etc., or temporarily, such as rotating appointments, like elections, aren't they implicitly saying they are rulers or masters over others? What condition of living is that called? Hint, it rhymes with grave. So here's an example of how you can envision the progression from overt chattel slavery, chain slavery, into it getting gradually better, where you have less slavery and more freedoms. So at the top left, we have the overt form where you keep 0% of the fruits of your labor. You have no choice of what to do. You're limited to the plantation, your little prison. There's a single master of the plantation. They're the master for the lifetime. Or maybe their children will inherit it. Well, that's what the lifetime would be. And then eventually it's inherited, and then until that person dies, well, they're the master until they die. And then there's slave patrols to catch runaways. Catch the runaway slaves. And there's beatings, and there's whippings for disobedience to keep them in line. And then things, quote, evolve. We have less slavery and more freedoms. They're getting gradually better. Instead of 0%, well, now you get to keep 1% of the fruits of your labor. And you can choose different work. You get to have some more choice. Oh, and you can even go outside of the plantation with permission. And you're allowed to enter other plantations with permission. And the plantation owners rotate mastership of plantations. So they say, oh, well, I'd like to try out over here. They go over here. They switch ownership and for temporary times, and they rotate. I guess that's a little fun for them. So we have different masters at different times. And then things again get gradually better. We get more freedoms and less slavery. Now we get to keep 10% of the fruits of the labor, and then eventually 20, and then 50, etc., and it keeps going up. And now there's no chains, there's no whippings. All slaves can rent land and they can trade. But only the house slaves can own land as long as they obey the masters. And then the masters set up a selection committee to elect the favored slaves, the house slaves who climbed the ranks and were the most obedient. And those ones are allowed to run plantations now. So we have temporary plantation masters. And then eventually house slaves elected the next house slave as a master. And the slave patrols, the police, were for those that broke the rules of the masters. And then things get even better, with even more freedoms. Now all slaves can, quote, own land, contingent on obeying the, quote, laws. All slaves get to elect their next masters. It's not just the house slaves or the conglomerate of masters who get to decide who comes next. Now it's all slaves get to elect their masters. And we have judges and fellow peer slaves to judge whether one breaks rules and decide their punishment. And if you toe the line, then things are mostly just. And most slaves are fine with slavery now. They don't even see it anymore. Because as the progression happened, well, there's no more chains, there's no more whippings, there's no slave markets. There's a lot more freedom to the point where they think they're free. So there's no desire to free themselves from the enslavement because they're already, quote, free. That's how they perceive things, that they're already free. So they don't need to work or have a plan of action or fight for their freedom, to free themselves from the enslavement. They just have to be, quote, good, law-abiding citizens on the plantation, and then they get to enjoy some freedoms and privileges. Because this is a society by and for the people. And obviously there's no better way to live than this way. So they still believe in the need for authorities or rulers to keep the, quote, law and, quote, order. They keep the chaos at bay. So this is a progression where you can see things could have happened this way. I don't think they did, but you can see how it goes from overt chattel slavery to having more freedoms to where we are now. The last row is basically where we are now. All that describes our society. And that brings us to how most people don't see slavery. The covert, occulted, societal slavery. In contrasting to image number 2, so instead of a high visibility and high social recognition, now you have the visibility is low. It is covert. There's no more chains or ropes to bond people. There's no more slave markets. It's not apparent. It's not overtly visible. It's covert. It's hidden, occulted. And the social recognition is low because of occulted comprehension. Government is a euphemism. Instead of the social recognition, government's the euphemism for slavery, where we still have the belief in the legitimacy of authority to rule everyone. Instead of owning people outright as property, well, now it's the belief in the legitimacy of authority to rule everyone, instead of certain individuals. So in that sense, it's gotten even worse. Obviously not in terms of the quality of life, but in terms of the applicability of acceptance of this form to apply to everyone equally. So it's more fair, I guess, quote, more fair in that sense. And the legal status is, again, this is legal, or they have a legal, quote, right to rule over all, and still they deny natural rights and natural law. And the slave's property, instead of 100% of the fruits of the labor taken, well, it's not 100% of the fruits of labor taken by the threat of greater violence. As mentioned in the previous slides, such as this one, it went up and up. And in certain countries, some people are more fortunate. Maybe they get to keep 80% or 60% or 70%, whatever the percentage is. Go back to image number 3, and when is it not slavery? Even at 0.1%, isn't that condition the same condition is created, but merely of a different degree, intensity, or severity? And here are some infographics, some memes from my collection of years ago when I used to collect memes on Facebook. So this is Jeff Bridges, I think, from a movie. He says, "I got an idea. Why don't we give a small group of people the right to kidnap, imprison, harass, steal from, and kill people so that we can be protected from people who kidnap, harass, steal, and kill from us?" What a great idea. That's genius. It was genius for the psychopaths. And we accepted their programming, their way of life is our way of life. The predator mindset has been given to us, and we gobbled it up and loved it. Because that's the deception here. We're in the last column, and sure, we're better off than the first column compared to the overt chattel slavery that was. But you can just see the progression, how things have just become more obfuscated, which allows it to pervade more easily. And the middle one is, without government, violent street gangs would take over. Good thing we have government, because that's not happening right now anywhere on the planet, right? Or for the maybe the Canadians like me, or the Europeans, or elsewhere. Oh, that doesn't happen in my country. That's only America. They're crazy with all their guns. Look at that violence of those Second Amendment loving, delusional, freedom loving, dangerous Americans. I don't know, I'm just suggesting how some people might interpret how that doesn't apply to them, but it does. This type of stuff goes on in other countries. They just probably don't show it on the news because they're more co-opted and less liberty-minded, less freedom-minded, even than already the constricted and perverted news organizations in the United States. But I guess you could look at it both ways. But essentially this is what people think of, well, we can't have a way of life without government, right? Because we need authorities or rulers to keep order and law, because this is what order and law is. Without governments, violent street gangs would take over. Yeah. And the last meme, what we view in society, which is even more polarized now and even more applicable. If a few people believe that our world is controlled by a small elite that do not have the benefit of the whole at heart, we call them conspiracy nuts. But if a few people claim they own everything, land and resources, and create a system in which everyone else has to work for pieces of paper simply to survive, we call them our leaders and role models. Ah, what a great world to live in. This one's just a little demonstration of rulership changes over time. So you could look at it as one ruler monarchy at the outset, originally. King, queen, pharaoh, dictator, whatever variation of term you want to call it. But essentially it's one ruler overall. So you have the one ruler, the one dot. And I say it's this way. This is what's right or wrong. You must obey. So it's one. The ratio is 1 to all. So one rules all. Obviously, they have their henchmen and their goons, but it's one person deciding everyone. And then because of the diseased belief in authority, well, other people follow their orders and do the acts of immorality to keep everyone else in line. And after that, we get, well, again, more improvements. Things get better, right? Instead of one ruler, well, we got a minarchy. It's a group of rulers. That's the belief in small government. So instead of an I say it's this way, it's we say it's this way. This is what's right or wrong. You must obey. Elect new rulers to change the rules. And that's where the ratio is some are ruling all. And you look at variation of that, or a mixture where you have people voting. But in terms of a majority of mob rulers, which is essentially what democracy represents as we the people belief, or people believe that they're the ones in charge actually, just because they vote. So that's where we say it's this way. We, the collective. This is what's right or wrong. We are the majority. The government represents us. That's the belief when you're in a democracy of we the people, or whatever the majority is, because you won in your election. Well, the government is supposed to represent you, that majority that won. Right, you're the big winners. Yay. Tap yourselves on the back. Did a good job there. You worked hard to get that win. And the ratio is, the smallest ratio is 51% decide or rule over, in the sense, through their majority, the 49%. So it's whatever the greater number is, well, that's what decides. So that's what people believe is what is actually going on right now, which isn't. It's more like a mix of, as Mark Passio says, an occultocracy with you could say a oligarchy, and I've referred to it as a plutocracy as well. So it's like a big mix of all these asses and isms. It's not something good, but this is the perception people have, where it's a democracy of we the people, the majority. But what does that signify, the majority? Well, that's essentially mob rule, where 51% get to decide what happens, and it affects everyone, including the 49% who possibly don't want it to happen. Or it could be 99% or 99 people deciding what happens to one person. So this is like completely perverted, and it's not based on what's actually right or wrong. So on the right side, the majority, minarchy, and monarchy simply equals ruled by what some people want, who claim to be the source for what is or isn't right or wrong. Claiming to be the source, claiming to be the origin of that, as if it's truth, as if they're God, that they get to determine themselves, whatever they claim to be, that they are actually in the right just because they say it, because they're in the majority, or because they are in government, or because they are the one ruler. Just because, that's all. I'm the one ruler and this is the way it is, so I'm the source for what's right or wrong, or we're the small group and we get to decide, and you get to elect new rulers to change the rules. If you don't like it now, we'll go to your election and just change the rules, but for now we're in charge. And then in the mob rule, well, it's just we make up the most amount of people, so we're the source for what is right or wrong. We are the gods, and we get to decide how things are going to be. In all cases, neither deal with what is actually right or wrong. They're not concerned with objective morality being known or followed. One perfect example is smoking or drinking is immoral or illegal. People have thought this at various times. Smoking cannabis, drinking alcohol, there's been prohibitions on that at various times in history, and it changes, and it's not prohibited, it is prohibited, it's not prohibited again. Well, that's not objective morality. Either it is or isn't a right to do, because it doesn't initiate harm. And in terms of the delusion, democracy is worse than monarchy, psychologically. People allow and accept more immorality as, quote, justified, since they think they are the ones with power by voting, so it makes everything legitimate. They just have to fight in elections to vote for their preferred master to do what they want them to do. What more do I have to say there? That's just how ridiculous it is. It's not legitimate. It's the whole deception of we the people, and the government represents us. So even with the problems of the whole 49 ruled by the 51, in terms of the representation through government of the 51 over the 49 who don't want something, it's just this whole psychological structure that creates justifications and excuses to give people the perception that the way they live is legitimate when it isn't. And then every 4 years they run off to the elections and fight for who's going to win to be the new master to do what they want them to do. Even though behind the scenes, as there was a paper in the past, it was in the past 10 years, there was a study on, demonstrating that we're in an, I think it was the conclusion was the term oligarchy, where the interests of the common people or the majority or people in general were not what made policy decisions and became new laws or ways that a country was led in the United States, that it was actually special interests and political action committees, lobbyists, who represent powerful interests that actually got the government to behave in certain ways and enforce that on the population as the direction that the country goes towards. So it was more of an oligarchy. But people still believe in the illusion that of this democracy and majority rule, even though that's in the reality, that's not how it actually operates, but people still believe that that's how things are, despite how flawed it is as a methodology of living. That's not even actually how things are. So they're out of touch with the reality that is before them. So how much theft is too much? Do you care if someone is stealing from you? At what point does someone stealing from you matter to you? Would it matter if they were stealing daily? What about once a month? Once a year? At what frequency or quantity would it stop to matter? You might not think you're being stolen from, but you are. We live in societies that currently have thievery as part of the foundation, with most of it sanctioned and even championed by the populace. Government operates as covert slavery. We allow theft to ourselves as long as it's not too much for us to tolerate. When it increases, we protest and beg for things to go back to the previous level of enslavement. The more covert or occulted the method of enslavement, the more effective it is at 1, being unperceived as slavery, and 2, persisting slavery as a way of life, as the condition of life that perpetuates. So the more covert, right? Here you can see how it's more overt and it becomes the most covert where we are now. Well, when you do that, it increases the imperceptibility that what you're actually living in is slavery. And it also makes that slavery persist. So here, occulted societal enslavement, how we are currently being enslaved in society. So these are the 3 main aspects of the to demonstrate how we're being enslaved, how we're being stolen from. Through our income tax, your earnings aren't yours. That's the punchline, is your earnings are not yours. You think your earnings are yours, but they're not yours. Your body performed labor to produce or acquire the fruits thereof. So you're doing actions to, you could be chopping trees and you get trees, you get material. That's original appropriation. And then it's your property. Or you go work for someone, well, in exchange for money, you're doing a work which then you transfer ownership to them and they pay you. But we have taxation, and taxation is a claim of ownership upon the fruits of your labor. Your body performed labor to acquire the fruits thereof. So when they make a claim of ownership upon the fruits of your labor, that is a claim of ownership upon your body, because your body is what was used to perform those actions to get that rightful property ownership. And by the way, sales taxes are also licensure. It's not just income tax that's a theft. You have sales tax, which is saying, well, you're not allowed to sell things without our permission. And the permission we grant you is that you have to pay us a kickback to have the privilege of selling things. And licensure is essentially saying your actions aren't yours. So even though you're not initiating harm and want to do something with what you own that you have a right to do, licensure is a claim of ownership upon your actions you can or can't take, denying you the right, whereby you need to beg me to let you do something, and you need to pay me to get that permission. So this is a claim to own your rights, to own your actions that you can take, and to own the body that creates those actions. This is a direct claim of ownership. Well, indirect claim of ownership upon your body. So there's so much stuff that's licensure by the government, or you're not allowed to do it. Oh, you want to sell alcohol? Oh, well, you need a permit. You want to drive a car? Oh, well, you need a license. You gotta renew it every year. Anyways, at least in where I live, that's the ridiculousness of it. Even though I am qualified to drive, I've demonstrated my capabilities. I have passed a test to show that I am capable of driving, and I do drive. But every year I have to keep paying for the privilege to drive, even though I already do drive and it's been demonstrated that I know how to drive. All it is bureaucratic nonsense to keep stealing from you, to beg for permission to do something that they won't let you do unless you give them money to do it, even though you have a right to do it. And finally, we have prohibition. Your body isn't yours. That's the punchline on this one. So income tax is your earnings aren't yours. Licensure is your actions aren't yours. And prohibition is straight up, your body isn't yours. Because you want to put something into your body that you own. And prohibition is a claim of ownership upon your body itself by denying you the right to do what you want with your body, as you are the only one who can own yourself and make that decision. Rightfully, you're the only one that can do it, but those slave masters, those owners, well, they think they know better than you, and they want to control you and decide what you can or can't do with your body, and that's what all of this is what you can or can't do with your body and the actions and your free will to choose and make decisions and act out those actions with your body. So it's all claims of ownership upon your body. And that's called slavery. It's just not, well, we're outright declaring that we own your body and we get to decide what you do and you're going to work where we tell you to work. It's not overt chattel slavery, but once you get down to what they're actually doing, well, it becomes obvious once you analyze it enough that they're all claims of ownership upon your body, which is what slavery is. It's just this is the covert, obfuscated, occulted, hidden form of slavery that we currently live in. And it's much more preferable, as we'll get to explaining later, compared to the overt, the overt kind. And what happens if you don't comply with or obey the government's claims of ownership upon you? Well, lucky for you, you get more claims of slavery and violation of natural rights and natural law. Taxation, licensure, and prohibition are all enforced by the threat of greater violence upon you if you don't comply, ultimately at the point of a gun. And this is coercion to deny your right to your free will choice of your actions that don't initiate harm to others. Since this is a constant in life, we live in constant duress. So here I have a nice quote. Your will doesn't matter. Do what I command of you. You must do what I will you to do. My will supersedes your will. If you deny my claim of ownership and enslavement upon you, my act of violence, then I will send my order-following enforcers to put you in a cage for not obeying. And if you dare defend yourself against this further violence, you will be, quote, legally assaulted or murdered. Signed, the psychopath. And that's what we have. That's the world we live in. We got psychopaths acting like this all over the place. You got the order-following psychopaths who think like this. You got the order givers who are further order followers for higher-ups. There's a big, long chain of obedience, a chain of psychopaths who either think like this explicitly or think like this implicitly by their actions that demonstrate that this is how they actually think, if not at a conscious level that they are even aware of, that subconsciously, unconsciously, that this is the programming, this is the subroutine, this is the algorithm that is running deep inside, nested in their psyche, at layers that they are not aware of. Because that's what they act out. And some of them don't act it out as severely, but the whole structure of our society and government is built upon this as an axiom that they justify for what they do. So we have a society of slavery believers who believe in the right to steal property from others who didn't initiate harm, and that's taxation. Make someone ask you for permission and pay for license to do something that doesn't initiate harm. That's licensure. Stop others from doing things that don't initiate harm. Again, licensure, prohibition. Disallow others from putting things into their own bodies. Prohibition. Make others put things in their own bodies. That's mandates. We saw a lot of that getting very popular in the past 3 years. Boy, oh boy, was that ever a big one in the past 3 years. Not only prevent you from putting things in that you want to put in, but things that you don't want in your body, they think that they have a right to make you put that thing in your body. Maybe one thing if it was just water. Okay, yeah, it's safe. Okay, you tested it right here. Here's the test results, and it's just pure water, pure distilled water. You still don't have the right to make someone drink it, even though it's benign, healthy, essential for living. Water is essential. At our current level of living, forgetting about eating the sun or breatharians or any of that there. For most people, water is essential, right? So even if it's essential for your current way of living, they still don't have a right to make you take it. But these past few years, they want to make you take something that for those of us who are looking at what's going on, what people are taking it, or even the trials, the quote trials before, we even look at the data that the companies publish, and that the so-called regulatory agencies are supposed to protect us from, in their documents, we saw that there were issues that they didn't test for this or that or this, and they're like, there's all these side effects that could be possible, including death, and no, we're going to make you take this thing. It's just insanity the past 3 years, which is a blessing. That's why chaos is great at teaching. The negative, suffering, it's great at teaching. Look at how many people have become more aware of the problems of how our society functions in the past 3 years. It's a blessing. When I look at it, I'm like, wow. It is so great. Apart from the suffering that people have gone through, that's not great. But apparently they needed it. That's why chaos is required sometimes and is probably necessary to increase. That's the way I view it. Chaos, things need to get worse. People need to suffer more. Because apparently, for some people, the past 3 years hasn't been suffering enough. Apparently they need to suffer more. Some people suffered enough. They weren't as aware before. And then when this started to happen with the government and all the stuff they did, shutting down businesses, all these nonsensical social restrictions and requirements, and people started waking up. They saw the problems of society that they could not see before and did not want to see, did not want to acknowledge. And their eyes got opened. Because it became more visible to them. The chaos got ratcheted up. And maybe they were made to suffer in their life. That's when it mattered to them. When it got personal, that's when it mattered. When it wasn't personal, when it didn't affect them personally, well, whatever. They didn't even care to think about it. They were completely oblivious to the condition of our way of life, what was going on in other aspects, in other areas of society that would demonstrate the negative and the immorality that we live amongst, or negatives and immoralities that are even more severe in other countries, and even by their own governments or at the hands of, I'm talking about people in other lands and their own governments, or our government that we are robbed from to pay taxes, which these people excused and justified. Oh, taxes great, blah, blah, blah. Who's going to build the roads? That's utopic to think we can't have government, and all these stupid excuses that people have. Well, they dropped a lot of those excuses when they started to personally suffer, when things hit home for them. Then they cared. And that's why, unfortunately, chaos, suffering, the negative, is often the greatest teacher. And unfortunately, that is what some people require. They do require. It doesn't have to be that way. They could. It's not an absolute requirement objectively for people to learn, for people to become aware of the negative, of the immorality, of the evil around them. That's part ingrained as foundational and as part of their society, as their way of life. But in their current condition, in their current psychological state, their state of consciousness, their level of consciousness, it is a requirement for them. For those people, unfortunately, it's become a requirement to have more chaos, more suffering, more negative, because that's the only thing that's going to make them care. They don't care about moral truth otherwise. It just doesn't matter, because it doesn't personally affect them. All right, that's enough of a side rant on that there. I've talked about it in the past, years ago, when I was doing more content. Let's continue. So after the mandates, we have make people do things against their will who don't initiate harm. And that's all of the above. Well, I want to do this. Oh, but I need to beg the government licensure. Oh, well, I want to put this in my body. You're not allowed. Prohibition. Well, I don't want this in my body. Oh, we're going to make you do it. That's mandates. Oh, I want to keep my money. No, we're going to take your money. All that is, you're making people do things against their will who don't initiate harm. Another one is people believe the right to command and control others who don't initiate harm. That's government. That's authority. Believe in the right to curtail other people's rights. Again, that's government. Initiate harm to those who disobey another's decreed beliefs, which is government. Government, the people in government who say whatever, legislative, judicial, or executive branch, blah, 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 this is the way it's going to be. And if you don't do it, well, we're going to hurt you. And it's just them decreeing things, saying, let it be. All right, fiat, that's what money is, but fiat looks, let there be light from the Bible. So fiat, that's what government is they're decreeing things. They're just, because they say it, that becomes the reality. They're saying, we declare it, we decree it to be this way, therefore that is now the way reality will operate, which is acting as a god. Right? They want to be, they believe themselves, probably not consciously, some of them do because they're psychopaths, they think of themselves, they believe themselves to be gods among the other men. That's a long line of history, and recorded history from their own mouths in the past 200 years of advocates of eugenics and social Darwinism who view themselves as above the rest, the so-called elites, where they view themselves as having the rights that other people don't have, but the, quote, right to do whatever they want to others, to sterilize others that they view as inferior. The creation of the education system as a plan to remove imagination and critical thinking, to make people less independent and less capable of inventing new things or finding new creative ways to survive and optimize survival and live better together. They want to restrict that because that destabilizes their order, their, quote, order of their system of how they want reality to operate, where they are the ones above the rest and they get to decide what others do, where they act as parasites who leech off of others, who actually do produce everything, and they just sit back, kick back with their feet up, smoking their cigars, eating their food, or whatever the hell they do. And they don't want other people to climb up the social ladder because they believe that they are the ones who are deserving because they've reached that rung on the ladder in the social hierarchy. And that means that they are deserving of it because they are superior genetic stock. And that's why they got there. That's their circular reasoning, I suppose, where we've reached this position because of our superior genetics. That proves that we have superior genetics because we got to this position in the social hierarchy. Anyways, all that can be talked about in its own presentation. So what we have is a society of slave believers who believe in rights they believe that some have the right to do things that they don't have a right to do because people apparently love authority and their enslavement. That's what it comes down to. Whether they're conscious of it, consciously aware of it or not. That's what all of this signifies. They like authority. I know some of them will even say it. Oh, I like authority. They won't say, oh, I love my enslavement, because they're not even aware of how they're enslaved, so they can't even be cognizant to affirm that positive association with their enslavement because they're not even aware that they're enslaved. But that is the actual condition. So not only do they love authority, which some of them openly state it, but they also love their enslavement. So someone else decides for you what you are or aren't allowed to keep, do, or ingest. Believing in the, quote, right of authority or slavery makes you an immoral person. These are not, quote, rights, but delusional beliefs from a deranged perception of right versus wrong. Consciousness becomes diseased and creates external chaos. That's the world we have, not a world of law and order, but a world of chaos, sanctioned and justified, and even championed by people who think that this is better than anything else we could create, and any alternative would be so much worse, so we have to love our enslavement, or else, well, things will be even worse off. Because they lack imagination, they can't envision any other way of existing other than that way to which they already have been conditioned to exist in the current condition. The current condition conditions them to propagate that current condition, which then in turn conditions more people, and on. It's a I guess ingenious. It's a very efficient modality between consciousness and reality, where the reality that currently exists conditions you to accept that reality and the reality of that condition, and then you, through your conditioning, you propagate more of that condition of reality that currently is the way it is. So it just keeps going on and on. And with further influence, well, you can degrade it even more. You can get people to accept more incremental, gradual increases in the degree or level or severity of immorality or wrongs or evil, violence that becomes normalized. So maybe you're not doing the direct initiation of harm yourself, but you're supporting, upholding, and legitimizing that others do immorality. So relating to taxation, well, I'm not the one taxing, or I'm not the one doing prohibition against you, or I'm not the one mandating this, or I'm not the one enforcing licensure, making you pay me to do something. Yeah, but you're not doing those direct initiations of harm yourself, but you're supporting, upholding, and legitimizing that others do that. So your words or your beliefs, if you're not explicitly telling people this, you're still believing it when you're supporting government and authority. Your words or beliefs advocate for immoral actions. Voting condones that violence, which is destroying human freedom, which is creating evil. And it's not hard to understand what is best for each individual and society as a whole. We need to respect each other's rights, which means the right to be free from the initiation of harm. And I've gone through this in part 1. Natural Law, the Science of Morality, part 1, rights. You go back to that one if you want more of an explanation. Yet, the government goes against this simple truth. This is how our society is currently operating. Insanity. That's the modality of our society. We're operating in a form of insanity. The legislative, judicial, and executive branches are like a three-headed hydra dividing up the power of how to rule and control the rest. There's a nice little imagery, little analogy you can think of. So if your country doesn't have legislative, judicial, and executive branches, well, it's not a two-headed hydra, not a three-headed hydra. Maybe it's a two-headed hydra, or maybe it's just one head, and they just got all the power to rule and control, and then they order the underlings, the order followers, to do things. And overt slavery, this is the overt slavery is difficult. It's dangerous. Overt slavery is too hard to maintain over time as the injustice becomes obvious. When I look at recorded alleged history, I see a struggle for more morality and freedom to emerge. That's what I see. I'm not a history know-it-all or a buff or whatever. From the little bit I just see a progression that looks like it's reversing, finally. Like, we've been going up over time. Like, if you look at prehistory, maybe things were high up, and then they degraded and they fell and they went lower and lower and lower. But, you know, when recorded history, alleged history, that is told to us that is actually what happened, which we can't really confirm. That's why I say alleged history, but let's take it as what is true, even though we can't actually epistemologically know that it was true. These are the accounts given to us. We don't have anything else to go on, so we can just assume and trust that that was the history. Maybe there's some variations. We don't actually know 100% that that's what actually happened, but let's just assume for the sake of argument that whatever was recorded in history is what happened. And so I see at that point, when things started to be recorded, is that there's a struggle to get more morality and more freedom to emerge, and then eventually things did get a lot better in the last few hundred years. But now, and that's pretty much thanks to the United States of America and their constitutional republic, and the attempt by the founders to instill principles of freedom as part of the law that the fallacy of government was supposed to protect, which backfired, obviously. Because you can't, when you give that power to a group of people, well, they twist it and pervert it, and eventually it just degrades. And then they do the things that they're not supposed to do. But anyways, that was all thanks to them, and then that started to degrade, and now we're where we are, where it's starting to go back downhill. So we have like prehistory, maybe there was an ancient Atlantis, maybe there was ancient civilizations, maybe there was more advanced technology, who knows, but things degraded. And then we got to recorded history, and then we went back up, and now it's like we're at the top of the parabola, or the bell curve, however you want to look at it. We're at the top of the curve and going slightly down. That's where we are now. We're heading downwards. That's where I see things. So many people, both those who are overtly enslaved and those who aren't, act to stop the overt slavery. So when you have overt slavery, that's what you end up having, right? That's what happened with overt slavery in the past few centuries, is that the overt slaves and those who aren't, who became abolitionists, tried to act to stop the overt slavery. So they rebel, they revolt, they create uprisings, etc., all of which is dangerous to the oppressors, to the masters, to the rulers. And they often lose their heads, literally. Off with your head, to the chopping block. So overt slavery has difficulty. It's dangerous. That's why covert, occulted slavery, is the better way to rule, control, steal, and leech as a parasite to get others to do work for you. You give them more freedoms. You convince them that they are now, quote, free, without them actually being truly free. Then they don't rebel as much, because they think they have freedom. They can't see the chains of their enslavement. They aren't beaten as much, or in the same way. And this is the obfuscation of the violence done unto us. So long as they, quote, obey the law of the new masters. They also keep themselves in line much of the time due to the fear of, quote, dangerous freedom. Whoa, watch out, that dangerous freedom. Whoa, 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 you over there? You want more freedom? Whoa, 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 whoa. Who do you think you are trying to get more freedom? You're dangerous. You're a danger to me. You're putting my life at risk. I don't want to let you do that. No, 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 no. Can't have that. No, 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 no. So that's how we keep ourselves in line. Whoops. So these people who fear freedom, they crave security and safety and the, quote, authority that pretends to provide them with the obviously false law and order. They think it's law, they think it's order, but it's just more chaos. It's not law. It's not lawful. Not true law. This brings us to the belief in authority. The main definition of authority relates to, quote, the power or right to give orders, make decisions for others to follow, and enforce obedience. So I got that just as a basic definition online. So that is to say, people in positions of power like politicians, police, etc. These are the ones who have the power or right to give orders, to make decisions, and enforce obedience. And other uses of the term authority relate to an authoritative source of information, such as someone viewed as an expert on a subject. But it's all just perceived authority. In all cases, the expectation is that an authority's word is taken as the way reality is or must be. The most egregious expression is the superstitious construct of government and government workers and the perceived legitimacy of power to control or rule others by enforcing obedience to their commands, as if it's actually a, quote, right they have. They have illegitimate or immoral power, sure. They have that power. But they never have that as a, quote, right. It's not a right. They have the power right now, and they exercise that power to give orders, and they make decisions for the rest of us. And if we don't obey, they enforce the obedience through the initiation of harm, which is a wrong, and that's violence. It's never a right. They have the power, but it's not a right. And that's the delusion that's pervading society, is that it's believed to be a right. And neither is anyone obligated to be obedient to the so-called laws they decide to invent. No one has a right to control nonviolent people, nor invent laws to be obeyed. Quote laws, because they're not real laws. Belief in authority makes you a slave. Authority to control is about some telling others what to do by giving orders or commands of compliance. Others are expected to comply and obey, or face negative consequences for refusing. It's saying, your actions are subservient to another's will. They decide what your behavior will be, what you rightfully do with your body, actions, is not yours to decide. The authority decides what you can or can't do with your body. They are claiming ownership of actions that come from your body, and hence claiming ownership of your body. Accepting authority to control is to accept being owned by another, to accept being a slave. Experts, the other form of perceived authority, can give suggestions, recommendations, or make claims of truth. But each individual has to make their own decision as to what they do, and discern for themselves if something is true or not simply do it or believe it to be true because an authority said or wrote it. Even without the authority to control, if you simply accept the word of perceived authorities as truth, then you're in mental slavery, in thrall, which is what that word means. The belief in authority makes you immoral. Belief in authority, abbreviated as BIA, not only makes you a slave, it also makes you immoral. Belief informs behavior. What you believe in your mind, in your consciousness, can then be acted upon, where you make a decision and choose to enact a behavior that all derives from that belief. The belief in authority leads to the behavior of supporting or condoning the actions of authorities to rule and do violence to others. How many people are there that give excuses and justifications for what authorities do? Way too many people. The majority. If no one believed the authority to rule or control was legitimate, then there would be no sustained support or justifications for the persistent immorality that they create, nor the resulting condition of slavery at various levels of severity of harm and quantities accepted. Without this belief in the legitimacy of authority to rule control, wouldn't people be more prone to think for themselves rather than accept the thoughts of the, quote, authorities or, quote, experts? If there wasn't this belief that authorities are the ones that we need to listen to because they know best, because they're specialized in a field, such as an expert, or because they have rights that we don't, for some people who still believe that, well, we got to just listen to them. They're the ones who know best. If there wasn't this belief, then people would be more prone to think, because they would understand, well, I have to discern for myself if something is true or not simply believe it's true because some person said it, who has this perception of being an expert and authority, Or also, not just discerning for themselves if something is true, but taking that discernment process and also applying it to their decision making for behavior to be acted, to be created, that they would make better decisions rather than listen to other people who make decisions for them. I'm pretty sure, without this belief, people would be more prone to think for themselves rather than accept the thoughts of others as if it's truth and as if that's representative of reality, simply because they said it. Police, politicians, doctors, or anyone in, quote, authority can try to punish you for not taking their word as truth or their will as your will to direct your behavior as demanded. If you don't do what they say, they punish you. There are so many instances where the pursuit of one's own will that doesn't initiate harm will have retaliatory consequences imposed by, quote, authorities who expect obedience. And all you have to do is look at the past 3 years. If you're completely unaware and ignorant of this, open your eyes, go look at it in some alternate media sites. Obviously, if you're coming across my video, even on YouTube, you probably are aware of a lot of things that this doesn't apply to you, and you're already aware of a bunch of stuff. But anyone who isn't, you got to open your eyes and go look at what has actually happened in the past few years. Doctors, it's been happening before that, is my point. Just my point is that the past 3 years, it's gotten worse. You've had people who've had their children taken away because they didn't do what a doctor, the authority of the doctor, said to do. Oh, you're putting your child's life in danger. No, they're not. They just don't agree with your opinion, right? They can make suggestions and recommendations and make claims of truth, but just because they say it doesn't mean that that's actually the way reality is or that it's true. But they don't like being questioned, some of them, or a lot of them. They don't like being questioned. They don't like being ignored. They say, oh, you should do this, or you must do this, and someone says no. Now, some of them in the past or present are so psychopathic that they try to, well, that's what they try to do. They try to punish you. They impose retaliatory consequences on you because they expect obedience. And when you don't give them obedience, that's an affront to them. Seriously. They view it as like, oh, how dare you? I'm the one who knows, and you think you know better than me? Well, so I'm going to put you in your place. That's the mindset here. It's been going on for hundreds of years, thousands of years. Now we have it more visible to us, and it's been affecting more people in the past 3 years, which is why, again, clap, clap, clap for chaos, for the negative, for the suffering. And it's unfortunate. I wish it didn't have to be that way, but for some people, that's what it takes. And that's what they got. And some of them have opened their eyes and realized some truths about reality that they weren't aware of. And some of them, they've suffered and they still won't see it. I guess they need to suffer more. And even some, no matter how much they suffer, they're still not going to see it. They're still not going to, quote, wake up. They will never have the real eyes to realize the real lies. Never going to happen to them. I'm sure there's some people, I guess I speculate, but there's some people it'll never happen. They'll die just believing in the ultimate superiority of authority and government and experts. And no matter how much they're hurt, or people they know they're hurt, or their loved ones are hurt, by simply believing what other people say, they're just going to keep doing it, unfortunately. And the belief in authority makes you an unthinking robot. The belief in authority makes robots, unthinking automatons that go from stimulus, the reception of a command from an order giver, to response, obedience to the order, that is to say, order following, not using the ability to stop and think before acting not thinking. The robot mind is the slave mind. Good thing to note there. The robot mind is the slave mind. When you do not think, when you go from stimulus to response to automated responses based on stimulus provided to you, information, knowledge, commands, and you go to a response of a predetermined output where you don't stop and think, where you don't process all the information correctly, weigh it out, look for contradictions, try to remove those contradictions, filter out bad things, bad information, false things, like the belief in authority. You don't have the correct input, the knowledge. So you're missing even definitions of what words are and the meaning of words, the accurate meaning of words. You don't have the knowledge of how reality is actually operating. Well, the other stimuluses you're going to receive, like authority telling you things, well, you're just going to be responding that that's reality. You're being input that this is the way reality is, and your output is, well, this is how I got to act because that's the way reality is now. Oh, this new thing happened in reality. Authority tells me this. The news tells me this. Academia tells me this. The government tells me this. Therefore, that's the reality that we now have, and I have to act in consequence to that new reality. The slave assumes authority is truth and does as they are told. It's a stimulus-response process devoid of higher thought in between. Collectivism is similar, as you don't think for yourself as an individual and accept the consensus trance that capitulates to authority, becoming controlled and subjugated to that authority. The belief in authority is a mind virus that blinds one from seeing and recognizing the immorality of what it represents and the condition of slavery it creates. This is the problem: the incorrect perception that authority is an acceptable, legitimate way to live. And the remedy to this robotic thoughtlessness and ignorance is learning. Again, the knowledge. This is all the trivium process. The knowledge, the input, the stimulus they have is low quality. They don't have the proper definitions to have an understanding of what is happening in reality. So they have an incorrect perception. And the remedy to that incorrect perception is, well, they need to learn more in order to gain that knowledge, receive that information that they can process and validate feedback with reality and see, oh, does this definition actually better describe what is happening in reality? Oh, it does? Oh, okay, this is actually what's happening in reality, as opposed to previously where they didn't even see what was happening in reality because their perceptions were limited by their definitions, which constricted what they could and couldn't see as happening in reality. So, remedy to their ignorance and thoughtlessness is learning. Consciousness is used in a fuller capacity to gain awareness of information or knowledge. Thoughts about knowledge need to be put between stimulus and response. Question authority, not just accept what they say. So as a result, we have people who are blinded by authority. This is order following. Actions don't change from being good to bad, right to wrong, or vice versa, based on whether you did it yourself or were told to do it by someone else out of fear, for money or gain, or any other reason. The Milgram experiments showed that people do things that initiate harm to others, whether they are aware of it being wrong or not when they do it. Many people do immoral actions because an authority says it's, quote, okay to do it, as if that absolves them of the personal responsibility for doing it. Obedience to authority has people do immoral actions that they would not otherwise do on their own. They don't do what they would normally do of their own will, using their own judgment. Instead, they do what they Instead, they do what the will and judgment of authority tells them to do, even if they know it's wrong and don't want to do it. They press on because authority said so. Belief in and obedience to authority is what gets many people to do immorality to others. It's a disease of the psyche, of the mind, of consciousness, however you want to term that. It's a disease in your internal realm, the realm that only you have direct access to, that you can share to other people through expressions of actions such as writing, creativity and art, whatever, or speaking verbally. That's the only way people get to see your internal world, your internal universe. The internal reality in you is expressed through your behavior. So here's about explaining delegating rights or authority. Can we delegate rights or authority? So at the top, if you have something in a box, something in a glass, like a glass of water. There's my cheap representation of a glass of water, a box with some blue stuff in it. Well, you can transfer that somewhere else. You have something, and then you move it somewhere else. That something that you have in the first area can be moved to the second area. Likewise, a property owner can delegate the use of property to someone else. And then someone else is allowed to do something with property that they weren't allowed to do before. Because they've been granted the right to use that property. If I have a car and I say, hey, yeah, if someone wants to borrow it, I say, okay, yeah, I give you permission. I delegate the use of my property to you. You can go use it and bring it back to me. Pay for the gas, whatever. There you go. And then they can use it. They're allowed to use it where they weren't allowed before. But if you don't have something, if you have nothing in your glass or in your box, well, you can't transfer that nothing and put it somewhere else, because you can't put something that isn't there somewhere else. There's nothing there to put somewhere else. And similarly, going to the right side, if X is not a right to do, then you can't transfer that. You can't delegate it. You can't give it to someone else. You can't let them do something. You can't give them the right to do X that no one else has a right to do, because no one has that right, so you can't give it to someone else. It's not there. I think in part one on rights, I briefly went into this as well. If I have $10, I can give you $10. If I don't have $10, I can't give you $10 to use. This gets into the whole deception of the banking system with fractional reserve deception, but anyways. If one person doesn't have a right to do something, no amount of people can have that right. Neither can a collection of people grant another collection of people a right for two reasons. Everyone has the same rights. And two, anything not a right can't magically become a right for others. So if everyone has rights, and then the things that aren't rights, then they can't take those things that aren't rights and magically become rights for others, either an individual or a group. Anyone who claims they have a right to do non-rights, which are wrongs, is trying to make a claim of ownership, slavery, and is a threat to others' existence. Because that's what happens when you take something that's not a right. Well, all the things that you can do that are not rights are actually claims of ownership. And I've also went into that in part 1 on rights. So, initiating harm solves problems? Is that true? And this is how people actually think. Can problems be solved with violence, like assault, coercion, or slavery? No, right? Right? Isn't that obvious? Yeah, most people, pretty sure 100% of people would be like, yeah, what is that, ridiculous? Obviously, you can't solve problems with that. You got a problem, something needs to be done, what are you going to do? Beat someone up or shoot them in the head or coerce them? Well, you might get them to do what you want by threatening them through coercion or enslaving them. You're going to make them do it. But that's not how you're going to actually solve a problem legitimately in your rights, lawfully. You can solve your personal problem, get that done, but you're creating another problem. So anyone thinking this is clearly deranged and probably a danger to others. Yet, this is what 99% of humanity believes is necessary to solve human problems, and they call it government. Do I have the right to rule you? That your will be my will, or else I hurt you? Do I have more rights than you? Then why does a group called government? Why do they have more rights? Why can they hurt people? Just because people don't do what the government wants, when they're not even initiating harm. They're not doing violence. The mere act of inventing, quote, rights that no one possesses or has a right to take is itself immoral. To claim one or some have the, quote, right to do something immoral is itself an immoral action to advocate greater immorality. Because when you speak or when you write, those are actions you're taking. And you're advocating this into reality. You're making suggestions. You're saying, hey, well, this is how things should be. Or I think this is how things should be. Oh, I'm not going to do it myself, but you who's reading it, well, look at how good my argument is. That you can do that too. That, well, maybe you have the right. Even if you don't claim it for yourself. So, oh, well, some over there, those people over there, that group, that special group, that class of people, well, they have the right to do these actions that are immoral. Even if you don't even understand that they're immoral. Just because you're advocating for that immorality and saying that it's a legitimate way to act in the world, that itself is immoral. Because what you're doing is you're creating a deception about reality. You're lying about reality even if you don't know you're lying. So you're creating falsity. So you might not have an intent to lie, but you believe a lie, and you've taken in that falsity, and it has become your, quote, truth, your personal, quote, truth, and then you spread that outward to the world to influence other people, to get them to believe it too, and then act on those beliefs, right? Because beliefs inform behavior. So when you express your beliefs that advocate for immorality, you are doing something immoral. Even if you don't do that immoral thing yourself, and even if you don't even understand it's immoral, you are being immoral. The same as if someone is stealing or coercing or doing other things, just like the government and the police and the military do, all the authorities. Well, it doesn't matter if they actually know that they're doing something immoral for them to be doing something immoral. They don't have to know it. But the reality is that they are doing it, whether they know they're doing it or not. They just don't have, they're ignorant, and they don't have the accurate definition for what they are doing. So to do any work involving government and to support the system of enslavement makes you a bad or immoral human being. So those people, they don't understand the objective difference between right and wrong behavior to advocate for slavery and believe it needs to exist. But that doesn't matter. They don't want to stop doing their job that supports this immorality. So, in conclusion, what that means is they want this immorality to continue. They don't see it as immorality, but if I want someone to steal from you and I'm like, oh, well, that's not immoral, it doesn't matter if I see it as immoral or not. I'm saying I want them to steal from you, so I want immorality to be done to you. So that's what they actually want. They want immorality, even if they're not aware that it's immorality. So they're not consciously saying, I know that this is immoral and I want it to be done because I'm an immoral person. It's not conscious to them, but the reality before us, the actuality of what they are doing, in truth, is that they are advocating for immorality. They want immorality to continue. So they are being immoral themselves. This brings us to abdicating personal responsibility. Oh, I got a typo. Apart from the belief that you have the right to do violence to others, one of the main deceptions of the belief in authority to get people to initiate harm against others is convincing them to believe they can give over personal responsibility for their actions to someone else. Well, I'm just doing my job. I'm not responsible. Take it up with the politicians, not me. But obey my commands and accept my violation of your rights, or else. So even these people who think, believe, are deluded into thinking they can give over their personal responsibility to a higher up in the chain of obedience. Well, this is what they're saying, like, oh, I'm just doing my job, but you got to obey me anyways, or else I'm going to hurt you more. And that's evident from their actions. You want to test it out, I don't recommend it. You can already see it in examples online and videos and stories and accounts and documents and court cases and everything. Or you can test it out if you what is it, a masochist? You enjoy suffering, you're suffering, you want to suffer, okay, you can try it out. Go try it out with an authority. When they try to enact some form of violation of your rights, such as coercion, and say no, and then try to defend yourself against it. Well, they're going to say, well, you're not obeying my commands? Well, I'm going to increase my violation against your rights. I'm going to ratchet it up a notch. So they believe and expect others to believe that someone else is responsible for their actions, as if they are just a robot or puppet being moved by the will of others. That's how in thrall their consciousness is. Looking at what we have created as a way of life, you can tell where the average person stands in knowing how natural law works. The Milgram experiments, which is the willingness to obey authority, and the Stanford prison experiments, which were about the willingness to be an authority to control others, are an indicator of this level, where you can see where the current mindset and the level of consciousness of the majority of people is at. And these are know-nothings who say no to nothing from perceived authorities, for the most part. They just go along to get along, don't rock the boat, do what the authority says, out of fear of punishment. You don't want that course of violence to get ratcheted up into assault or murder, because they will bring it to you if you dare to oppose them. So these authority experiments, Stanley Milgram of the Milgram experiments expected, I think it was 3.5%. So these figures might be off there. And obviously there's no source information. Go research any of this stuff you want. Most of this presentation, as most of my presentations, have a lot of information that I learned from Mark Passio, mostly, or other sources online maybe. Some stuff I come up with myself. As you can see in some previous work I've done, infographics I've made, contemplations, things I've put out. But most of it is inspired, as I've mentioned on my site, by Mark Passio. Like, my site is inspired by Mark Passio. The reason I'm doing the work is because of the inspiration of Mark Passio. Most of the content, knowledge is derived from the content of Mark Passio. Who knows where he gets it from, the books he's read and whatever, but you can find a lot of this information online. Look into anarchism, look into voluntarism. There's a lot of good resources. But I'd have to say Mark Passio is the best resource out there to get a lot of interconnected information on slavery and freedom and natural law and the occult and a lot of other information as well, symbolism, order followers, and authority. There's a lot of good content. So I don't source things. I'm just making a little few minutes here to thank Mark Passio and just say that that's where a lot of this information comes from. And I've looked into, oh, he said this. Okay, yeah, all right, let me go check into it. Here, this was said here about this. So the Milgram experiments, you can look into it yourself. And just like all the other stuff, I'm not sourcing anything. So you don't like that? Oh well. I'm not talking about specific instances of events in history. So there's nothing to source apart from like Stanley Milgram. Like these are specific instances in history of experiments that were conducted, and you can go look into them. Everything else, these are eternal truths that you can gain knowledge of from information from others, receive that knowledge, and then you can process it and contemplate it and see how well that information accurately does or does not reflect reality. And that's the measure. That's your verification. You need to verify. You need to see the demonstrability of a claim of truth in reality. And then you can say yourself that it's true, that you know it's true. That's your epistemological foundation, that you know something is true. Not that you know it as information, that you know it as a body of knowledge, but that you know that that body of knowledge is actually true because it's demonstrated and reflected in reality. And if you can't do that, if you don't see it reflected in reality, then maybe it's true, but you can't say it's true. Because if you say it's true without seeing it reflected in reality, without it having been demonstrated, without verifying it, then all you have is a belief of something being true. And that's the difference between saying something is true and believing something is true. By actually knowing it's true when you say it's true. Because epistemologically you've actually verified it in reality. That's the way things actually are. The thing that something is being, that it is, be that way. So instead of 3.5% of people, which were the teachers, the subjects of the experiment, the actual people that were the subjects of the experiment were referred to as teachers, he expected 3.5% of them to obey authority and proceed to lethal shocks after the shocked person, which was a fake participant known as the learner, because for the person who was administrating the shocks, they were supposed to be teaching them the lesson of you get the answer right or you get shocked. So they were the, quote, learner, the fake participant, who wasn't actually getting shocked. So he only expected 3.5% of people to proceed to lethal shocks after the shocked person revoked their consent to be shocked by saying, I don't want to do this anymore, get out of here, let me out. And the people kept going. So instead of 3.5%, it was actually 65% of people who were willing to murder someone if the authority told them they needed to continue shocking them to death. That's pretty bad. The authority tells you to do it, and you shock someone to their death. Murder. Just because an authority said it was okay. That they were responsible and not you. In Munich, the experiment yielded 85% obedience. I don't remember what year that was done, but you can go look it up. Hey, maybe I'm wrong, but when I looked it up, that's what I found. Another version of the experiment where the teacher would instruct an assistant, the fake participant, to administer the shocks. This resulted in over 90% lethal shocks. So it seems that being an order giver made one more willing to tell others to murder. So as opposed to, it also depends on which area of the world you're in, and your propensity, and the population's propensity to obey orders of initiating harm to someone, in this case an experiment. just because an authority told them to do it, and that the authority would be held responsible and not them. So even though it's 65 and 85%, depending on the area of the globe you're in, and the time period that these experiments were executed and administered in society, when the person who was actually the subject became an intermediary authority who was telling someone else to do it, it looks like they were even more willing to just keep telling someone to administer the shocks when they weren't doing it themselves. So when they were doing it themselves, 65% of people were willing to administer the shocks because an authority told them to do it and that the authority was responsible. But then when they reversed those roles, when they were the one telling someone else to administer the shocks and they thought it was all real, they went up to 90%. So even though it's like a contradiction, again, this is like different time frames, time periods, and different localities on the planet. So you can have different psychological frameworks for different times and different peoples in areas. It's interesting that there's a contradiction between believing you can abdicate your personal responsibility to murder someone with shocks by the authorities saying that they are responsible, but then when you reverse the roles, you even feel less responsible because you're the one only telling someone to do it, and then they do it, so you feel less responsible to keep telling them to do it, even though when you go into the experiment, there's obviously the authority of the quote scientist, who's the authority of the expert, telling you that you can do this. This is going to be your role. You're going to be telling someone to administer the shocks. And then you do that. So there's obviously still the chain of obedience where someone's above you, but you act as an intermediary to the person who's going to do the shocks. You're even more willing to just keep telling them to do shocks and expecting them to obey to the point of murdering someone. So I'm just pointing out that interesting contradiction and abdicating your personal responsibility to the higher authority so that you can murder someone versus you being the authority telling someone to administer the shocks but feeling even less responsible. I suppose it's the explicit act of the original experiment of being told that, oh, no, you're not responsible, I'm responsible, I'm going to take on the responsibility if anything bad happens to them. So I guess it's not a contradiction, and in that sense of their mindset of being absolved of the responsibility because it shifts onto the authority who's telling them what to do. But when they are the actual in the position of authority to tell someone else to do the shock, they're not assuming that same level of responsibility for the action. So they're not thinking the same way that, oh, well, I'm the authority telling them that they are responsible. I'm not the authority telling them that I'm the one responsible. So I'm the one who's accepting all the responsibility. So there's that contradiction. Yeah, it's still there. It's because they're not actually doing it, they still don't view themselves as responsible, and they're more willing to do it. But when they are the ones doing it, if someone else says, hey, I'll step in and I'll take responsibility, then they're like, whew, okay, all right, I'll keep doing it since you're taking responsibility. It's just an interesting thing to take note of. Sorry, I ranted a bit there. I went on a bit too long. And the other famous authority experiment, other than the Milgram experiment, is the Stanford prison experiment that showed that people are ready to assume roles of authority and control others if presented with the option by a perceived authority, in this case Zimbardo, rather than deny that role to do something else, and do something else. So when they were presented with the option by the perceived authority of the experimenter who sets the rules for the experiment, said, okay, this is what you're going to do. You're going to be an authority, you're going to be in the role of authority and control others. So rather than deny that role and do something else, and not treat someone else like that. They just, oh, okay, that's the role I'm going to do. Yes, sir. So they, and again, this chain of obedience where the authority from the quote scientist who told them these are the parameters of the experiment, and they accepted to do that. They accepted to take on the role of an authority and control, rather than say, oh, well, no, I'm not going to do this, and walk out. So you could have had everyone walk out. Everyone that Zimbardo approached to do it, he could have said, every single person could have said, nope, I'm not doing that. Get out of here. And they walk out. But that's not what happened. People took up the role of being an authority. So the experiment was stopped after 1 week, or maybe short of 1 week, 6 days. I don't remember, 6 or 7 days. It was supposed to go on for 2 weeks, but it only lasted 1 week because someone interjected and said, this is unethical, your experiment. And the reason they did this was because those in the role of authority as prison guards devolved into domination, torture, and other violence as they saw the quote, prisoners in the experiment as less than deserving to have their rights respected. And that's just how the elites have viewed things for decades and centuries and thousands of years, where they're in positions and they view themselves as more deserving of it, and for whatever reasons, such as the bullshit of genetics, and so that they have the right, they have the quote right to do what they do. And this brings us to collectivism, another one, the collectivism groupthink experiment, which Mark Passio went into in his long series on order following and authority. The Milgram experiment, the Stanford experiment, and the third wave experiment in obeying authority by giving over or abandoning oneself and one's self. So oneself and one's self. So yourself and your self, your identity, your self-identity, to groupthink and collectivism. A teacher gave certain teenagers ideas of belonging to something that alleged to be creating a better future, but obviously it was devoid of understanding of moral rights and wrongs. This ideology, the idea he promulgated, no teaching of moral rights and wrongs, just of a better future. And with this idea, well, there were people who were put into belonging to that group, that collective. So they were the in-group. So those in the in-group of the ideology then began mistreating those in the out-group who weren't part of their collective, part of their group, part of the group they identified with, that became part of their identity, part of their sense of self, because they abandoned themselves and their self-identity to that collective ideology. And that's what I'm saying here. They gave their individual thinking over to groupthink, not thinking for themselves if what they were doing was right or wrong. They were justifying the means by the idea of their ends. So everything they did was justified by the ends of, well, our ideology is superior, and because you're not in it, well, you're inferior, because we're creating a better future, and you're not creating a better future. So you need to join our group because we're creating a better future, and if you're not, well, you're not good, and we're going to just treat you like crap because you're not part of this group which is creating such a better future. And this is what happened throughout history with leaders. This is what has happened and what is happening. And this is what happened in history with leaders that we can see. The authorities and the rulers who convince people that they are going to be part of something, quote, great, something, quote, good, that will make the world better. So they give themselves over to the ideology and do the evil acts under the belief of a greater good coming into existence. And this is evidenced with Trotsky, communism, and Mao, and Hitler. People buy into a belief about, oh, things are going to be better, we're going to create a better way to live, and all they're being All that's being done to them is they're being suckered with an ideology, a false philosophy of something better that isn't. It's just a fake promise. And then you go along with it, and then you just give more people power and say, oh, these people had the power. Well, now we're going to shift the hands of power, and these people are going to promise us a better future. And then what happens is they get a worse future. Things are even actually worse. And the enslavement goes up, the immorality goes up, rather than going down. Instead of freedoms going up, the freedoms go down. So all this has to, regarding the last experiment and collectivism, there's identification, adherence, and belonging to a collectivist groupthink hive mind, to to its ideology and to its members. So you have an identification, adherence, and belonging to a collectivist groupthink hive mind, to its ideology and its members. And this matters more than treating other people as moral equals. Harm done by outgroup others to their in-group members matter more than, and it's often greater harm, done to their in-group. Harm done by outgroup others to their in-group members matter more than, often greater harm, their in-group does to the outgroup. An example of this is cops. And even their outgroup supporters, the bootlickers, of the in-group in society. So cops view the killing of one of their own in the group as more egregious than the killing of non-cops. Cops want to kill a cop killer more than someone who kills a non-cop. Their psychology promotes a, quote, blue code to hide the immorality and crimes their fellows commit against non-cops or other cops who aren't, quote, team players in the immorality. So this is, you can look at Serpico, and there's other movies that demonstrate this. That's happened, where you join in, either you support us and you go along to get along. You got to be a team player in our immorality, and if you don't, well, then you're our enemy too. And even though you're in our in-group, well, we're going to, we're going to hide the crimes that we do to you. We're doing crimes to people in the out-group, and if you don't go along with that, if you don't become a team player in the harm we do to the out-group, well, then we're also going to do harm to you, even though you're in our in-group, because you're not supporting our immorality and not a team player in our immorality. Adherence to and maintenance of the collective group identity matters most. Their wrongdoings hardly result in just punishments. It's mostly slaps on the wrist or being forced to retire and keep their pension. Unless there is public outcry, then they, quote, throw the book at the violator to appease the masses. Recently, before the pandemic, scandemic, and even during all the protests, if there weren't the protests, the guy that killed or murdered, whatever case, it goes back year after year, decade after decade. This is happening in the United States and in other countries where these people in authority murder other people. And if there's not a public outcry, well, those people barely get punished. But when there's public outcry, and it's severe enough, then they throw the book at him, then they make it a severe punishment to appease the masses. But that's the only time they go against one of their own in their blue code. Because they're always covering for themselves, and they're trying to justify everything and keep it going. But when there's a public outcry for one incident or two incidents, then they do something about those specific incidents. Collectivism versus individualism. Do you believe in the construct of the collective as what's more important to uphold that is to say, the greater, quote, good at any cost? Or does the real, tangible individual come first to preserve and protect natural rights and actually create good? That's pretty much the two sides. It's not a false dichotomy. There's no in between. Because if you're not an absolute adherent in the actual tangible individual that comes first and to preserve and protect their natural rights, and that actually creates good, well then you're not gonna. I seem to have lost my train of thought. What I'm getting at is, if you don't accept that, then you're more into the collectivist camp. Maybe you're in between, but you're not going to actually create good with the other side. It's only when you accept the foundation and reality, the primary substance of the individual that comes first, and the inherent natural rights that they must preserve and protect and defend, and that's what actually creates good and keeps good present. If you're not accepting that, well then you're more towards the collectivist side of this artificial construct. So individualism is, the individual is natural and real. The individual owns property. The individual has rights. The individual interacts. All interactions between individuals are voluntary and consensual. Any involuntary interaction of violence is not tolerated, and part of that individualism and natural rights is to uphold freedom and remove slavery, remove immorality, remove evil. But when you're in collectivism, the collective is artificial and constructed. It's constructed based on the individual. So if you don't favor the individual first, then you're not even building a collective based on respecting the individual. The individual comes second. And this idea of collectivism and this artificial construct as being more important is used by the state to prey upon the desire for a better life, of helping others, which is altruism. And it's collectivism is also tied to the idea of the greater, quote, good for the collective. And it uses violence, which can't create true good overall in the collective group construct. So even though they're claiming that they're going to create good and the greater good at any cost to the individual, well, right there, when you violate the individual, you already know that the result you're going to get is not good in the greater capacity. It's impossible. You can't create true good by a violation of natural rights and natural law of the individual upon which your construct is built upon. It's like, I'm going to have a barrel of apples and they're all going to be good to eat. But I'm going to make one apple rot, but my barrel of apples is still good, even though I made one apple rot. No, your barrel of apples is not good, because that's what the proposition of truth table demonstrates, that all your propositions have to be true for your conclusion to be true. So as soon as you have one thing that's false, your conclusion that's derived from each individual proposition together to arrive at that conclusion is no longer substantiated on truth, because it's based on falsity. So your conclusion, maybe you worded it a certain way that it could be true, but because you've based it on false premises, that your conclusion is likely false if you're using one of those false premises as a foundation, as a pillar to support your conclusion. So in the same way here, your collective isn't going to be creating any true good if you're violating the moral truth of individualism and the individual rights. So collectivism promotes coercive interactions as what's normalized, and it destroys freedom and creates slavery or evil. So authority's claims. What does authority claim overall? That they can coerce others, which is violence, to do things against their will. Deny others the right to do things that don't initiate harm. That they have a monopoly on violence, Only their coerced services are legitimate to deal with violations. We can't use other services to deal with violations, or even in some cases, we're not even allowed self-defense. Welcome to, I don't know, pretty much any country that isn't the United States of America, I presume. I'm joking, but it's almost that way. Certainly, pretty much that way up here in the north of the U.S. Sad. Pathetic. And authority claims to deny us rights that they claim only they have. So there's different classes of people that have different, quote, rights, and that's Animal Farm. Read that book, another one by George Orwell, a.k.a. Eric Blair, I think his original name is, the author of 1984. Good book. This demonstrates the ludicrousy of our way of life. And they claim that they can deny others the right to defend themselves against this violence. All the things that they deny. They can coerce, deny rights, make you do things, have a monopoly on violence, not allow yourself to defend yourself. And those... another spelling mistake. Those who refuse to obey will have more violence conducted upon them. Oh, you're going to refuse taxation theft? Well, you're going to get locked in a cage. Oh, defend yourself against their violence? Well, you're going to get assaulted or murdered. And the translation is, you're my slave. I'm in charge. You will do what I say. If you don't, I will do other, more severe violence to you, against you. You must obey me, otherwise I have the right to commit violence against you. The belief in the legitimacy of authority to control others who don't initiate harm is not a true claim. It's a claim of ownership upon others, which is illegitimate. It's a false claim made from a sick consciousness, a deluded mind. It's psychopathic to think you have a right to be a master ruler over others. It's a disease of thinking you can make things become true just because you say so, believing that you're a god. You could create whatever you want, and that's just the way it is. You can say things that have to be this way, and that's the way they have to be, right? God said, let it be, and that's the way it was. Well, they say, oh, well, I'm going to say that it's this way. I decide it's this way, like a dictator. Dictator's etymological roots is having to do, I say it is this way, so it is this way. It's whatever they say is the law, is the truth, is reality, is what they want other people and expect them to use to inform their behavior and behave that way and obey that way that reality should be according to what they want. And all these claims that authority make are made by twisted minds. Twisted minds create it. Twisted minds continue to use it to dominate over others, and twisted minds believe it's true and accept that this way of life is moral, natural, or necessary. The belief in authority warps our reality into an unreal way of life that doesn't make sense. And that is why, in my opinion, we have so much depression, because something I've concluded long ago is that depression is mostly a incongruence, disequilibrium, disharmony, imbalance, contradiction from your expectations of what's in reality to what reality actually is. And that happens when your expectations of what you think reality should be, or what you thought it is, or what you deserve, things like that. Well, when reality smacks you back down to the floor and says, well, what you believe and what you thought, that's not the way it actually is. Here is how it actually is. Well, that's a hard landing, and you crash. And that destabilizes your worldview and your normalcy of how things were. It creates a shock, and it puts you into a depressive state, because how you thought reality was, or how it should be, wasn't actually how it was. So you have adjustments to make. to your perceptions to align with reality, and in that abrupt incongruity, disharmony, disequilibrium, imbalance, contradiction between your false perception and the actual reality, well, your psychological and emotional makeup takes a negative, has a negative impact to your emotional and psychological framework, and you need to realign. You need to let go of your attachment to what you thought reality was, or your expectations of reality, or what you think you deserve. And in some instances, like, people can get fired and it can totally put them in a depressive state. And then they get told, oh, well, here's some drugs to help you. And it most likely doesn't help them. And then they just get dependent on it, and then they're addicted to it. And that becomes their new normalcy, is the drug that used as a crutch to take away those negative feelings from that clash between their perception and reality, creating the negative emotional and psychological imbalance. The drug took them away from those negative states, and then they use it as a crutch, and they become attached to that. So rather than letting go of their attachment through introspection and self-reflection, letting go of the attachment to that false perception, their expectations of reality, and aligning with the actual reality. And then, sure, you can work to improve it and say, well, things shouldn't be this way, and I'm going to work to make them better. That's fine. But when your expectations are, this should be that way, or I shouldn't have been fired, and you won't let go that, well, you did get fired, so, deal with it. Deal with the reality that is before you. Okay, you didn't want that, but we don't always get what we want. Bad things can happen. People can be assholes. We can be let go. There's a lot of other things that can depress loved ones, losing people. So there's all these things that you expect reality to be a certain way. And then the shock is something changes in reality, and that creates such a destabilization in your emotional and psychological framework that you become depressed. Well, you got to work through it through introspection and self-reflection, and taking drugs from the pharmaceutical industry or otherwise is not the actual solution to overcome that psychological and emotional suffering. And maybe you need to escape for a little bit, but recognize that you can't just stay in that escape state. You have to let go of those substances in order to work past the trauma that you have in your psyche and in your emotional makeup. All right, that's enough of a tangent there. That was just to explain how things don't make sense, because our reality is an unreality. Even though it's the reality, it's a false reality. I've talked about this in a previous presentation, Consciousness and Truth, I think in 2015. So I go more into it there about how we have the reality, the truth that currently is. Well, that's just the way it currently is, and that's the truth of the current condition, which can have a lot of falsity in it, of false ways, of immorality. And then we can accept that that currently is the way it is, but we don't have to accept that that has to be the way it is. But we can change it, and we can empower ourselves to change it. Anyways, let's keep going with this one rather than bringing up more information and knowledge from previous work I've done. So, the belief in authority warps our reality into an unreal way of life that doesn't make sense. Yet people believe this nonsense. And it's not just the claimed belief in the legitimacy or, quote, right to control others. Many people are obedient to all forms of perceived, quote, authority. They blindly believe what, quote, authorities say because an authority said it. And again, look at the past 3 years and you'll see plenty of examples of that. Abundant. Overwhelming. So when we're talking about authority, that's just the general. And we go back to, 10 slides ago, 15, 20, I don't remember. I started with the main definition of authority has to do with people in power and giving orders, making decisions for everyone else, and enforcing obedience. But if you're looking at authority, there's other authority. There's the authority of truth. Was it Gerald Massey? The quote of something about how foolish it is for those who have taken authority as truth rather than truth as authority. Well, truth is the authority. So you have, which has priority? The authority and laws of man, humanity. Now here I'm not talking about the gender or sex, man, biological male, whatever. I'm talking about humans, humanity. And man is just a short form for that. So don't get all excited and upset about that. So in general, man's laws, man's authority. Which one has priority? Man? The authority and laws of man, or the authority and laws of nature, existence, reality, or truth? Well, if you're having trouble figuring this out, which came first? Did man exist before nature and existence? Or did nature, existence, reality, truth exist before man? Well, man came after. Man is a subset of nature. Nature came first. Nature is not a subset of man. So the one that has priority is nature, existence, reality, truth, law, real law. The authority of natural law, moral truth supersedes the contradictory false authority of man's, quote, laws that are invented afterwards. And there's also another legitimate authority where you are the authority of you, not someone else over you, but you are the authority of you under moral truth. So it's not that man doesn't have authority himself as an individual, because you do. You have authority over you, but under moral truth, under the authority of truth. Then you come next, because moral truth, moral law, natural law supersedes the man, and we come after. So there's always moral truth, which is the ultimate authority, and then you have your authority, the control over you. You don't control reality, you don't control nature, you don't control the truth, you don't control existence. You don't have authority over all of that. But as an individual, the only authority you have is over yourself. To be a master over yourself, to be a master of yourself, not others. Anything you create makes you the author of that creation. You author your life. Being an authentic author is to not just follow other people, what they do or say, but to determine truth, to guide behavior by verification. So I've already briefly mentioned that earlier in here, in other slides and explanations, expounding upon it, that only you can determine what the truth is and determine it for yourself. Someone can tell you what the truth is, but if you just believe what they say, then you just have a belief of what is true. You don't actually know that it is true epistemologically. And so being an authentic author of creating your life, you have to verify if something is true in order for it to guide your behavior authentically. False, inauthentic, quote, authority is the external authority of control over others, and this is violence. To accept or obey that, quote, authority is to subsume our innate authenticity to truth and authorship to be our own authority in creating our lives. So this false authority, they author a narrative for us to buy into. And then we then live their story that they remain the author and authority over their version of reality that we live and create more of. It was like the Castaneda predator mindset. Well, the predator gave us their mindset. And that's what we have. We bought into it. They give us narratives. They're doing it now. And they're succeeding very well. They're doing a great job at it. They give us a narrative. We buy into it. That's their story. And we live their story. And they remain the authors and authorities over that version of reality, their version of reality, that we then live and create more of. They got us good. They got us real good. We're suckered so good. Truth, reality, existence, nature is the only authority above you. Authentic living is doing your best to know the current reality, what is, and what should be actualized into reality, which is morality, to create a world according to authentic, real, genuine, true, ma'a, moral living. And ma'a is a derivative of ma'at, the concept, the goddess from ancient Egypt. I've done presentations on this. I just put it in there because this ties it into my previous work and this, that to create a world that's authentic and real and genuine and true, well, all those words, authentic, real, genuine, true, is the word ma'a, and ma'at is authenticity, reality, truth instead of true, reality for real, authenticity for authentic. And it has to do with moral living, because ma'at was also morality, and ma'a is moral. And that's how you reach the capital L living. Anyways, that's my understanding of the symbolism, whether that's supported by ancient Egyptology or not. I don't care. I just look at the symbolism and what the symbolism conveys itself as symbolism, not what a civilization, which may be degraded from the original understandings that the symbolism itself conveys as symbolism, and whatever they wrote and said that it represented in their civilization with control and pharaohs and rulership and masters and slaves. Well, you can look at what their society said the symbolism was, or you can see, well, what else could it mean? If you just look at the symbolism itself, what do these symbols represent? And then you can see what is actually being told through the symbolism itself. And that maybe that civilization got this knowledge and understanding conveyed through symbolism from previous people upstream in ancestry, maybe from an ancient civilization which had a greater way of living, and this knowledge was conveyed, and there was a cataclysm, and the knowledge was preserved in some form, although a degraded form, or it was preserved but then it was twisted and manipulated, and still the symbolism was used through pictographs, the hieroglyphs, but they used that symbolism and twisted it in order to support the society they wanted to create, a society of control. Anyways, that's how I view it. I'm not saying that this is absolutely the truth, but this is what I believe. I do have beliefs, but I do my best to try to convey things as truth that you can verify at any point in time, because they're eternal truths, and you can verify them yourself. But that's my conception, my belief of the pictographs, hieroglyphs, and their origins, and what they were originally conveyed to mean, contrasted to the way the society that was constructed and used that symbolism. So that's my little explanation for that. That's enough of a sidetrack tangent there. And authority's moral culpability. Oh yeah, by the way, whenever I use authority in the whole presentation, obviously I'm talking about the illegitimate belief in the alleged right to control and rule others, apart from this one, where I'm talking about legitimate authority and the authority of nature here. Everywhere else, when I just say authority, I'm just talking about the bullshit kind of authority. So authority is moral culpability. We have order givers and order followers, and their moral culpability. So we have order givers. They advocate for immorality by working to get others to do the immoral action they want to be created into existence. They're not creating the specific immoral action themselves, but they want it to be created by someone else. They use their will and their action, be it through their voice, or through money, or through threats, to get that immoral action created into existence. They're less morally culpable. They're not as morally culpable. And that's not to say that they have zero culpability for the immorality that is created. They have culpability, but they have less. Because their actions are still immoral, because they're advocating, as I mentioned, talked about in the previous slide, that if you're advocating for immoral action, that itself is an immoral action. Your will is gone through an action. They're not just thinking of it in their will and then it becomes reality. They're acting on it. They're using their voice to influence people. They're paying people off with money. They're making threats, which is the whole coercion of government and rulership. And so they're doing things. They're just not doing the thing that they want finally created, such as other coercion or assault or murder or a system of control and violation of rights. They're not doing that immorality themselves by keeping it in place, such as the enforcers, the order followers are. But the action that they are taking is still an advocating for that to be created, even though they're not creating it themselves specifically, directly. They still want that to be created, and they're putting actions and behaviors into the world in order to get that done by other people. So for example, I want you to do something, and you agree to do it for X reasons. Money, personal gain, fame, social recognition, whatever, promotion. Oh, that's what I'm going over in the right side, right? So for whatever reasons, anyways, I want, you do. Now the order followers, they're influenced by others to do immoral actions that they want to be created into existence. To do the immoral action that they want to be created into existence. They accept to subsume their will to the will of others for favorable personal outcomes, be it for money, for promotion, acceptance, whatever. They use their will and action to directly create an immoral action into existence. Whereas the order givers didn't create that specific immoral action into existence, the order followers did. So they are more morally culpable because they directly create the immorality, that specific immorality. So for example, you want me to do something, and I agree to do it for X reason or reasons. You want, I do. And for some people, maybe if it's very immoral, I won't do it. But for most of the order followers and the police and the military, well, they're doing a bunch of immoral things and they agree to do it. Maybe they have a limit somewhere that they won't do, but for now, they haven't reached that limit. They still do it. So voting is perpetuating authority and slavery, and it's a false solution. You have the perception of choice. Are you going to vote for more evil? No. Are you voting for more evil, or are you voting for less evil, less violence? That's your choices. This is your perception of choice. It's a bunch of bullshit, because if you're voting for more evil or you're voting for less evil, whatever your choice is, you're still creating evil between your candidates. Oh, well, this guy's more evil and this guy's less. I'm going to vote for the less evil because he's less evil. But you're still creating evil. Either way, if it's less or more. Sure, less is better. Okay, great, it's better, but you're still creating evil. It's not an actual solution. It's like a stopgap. So it's a false, quote, solution of begging the dominator system to do less harm in exchange for giving them your power. Don't beat us daily, only weekly. Thank you. Thank you for not beating us daily anymore, and you're only beating us weekly. We love you. No, you're still giving the dominator system your power. Okay, you're getting less harm, so that's an improvement, but it's still not an actual solution. Because you're still in the dominator system, you're still enslaved, and you're still giving them their power rather than not giving them your power. So it's a partial, half-assed win. Yeah, it's a, quote, win. It's less evil. And for most people, They take it. And everything is fine now. Nothing more to do. Ah, there you go. I won. My candidate won. Whew, there we go. We avoided that horrible orange man bad. Boy, oh boy, good thing he didn't win. Everything's fine now. Nothing more to do. I can go back to my life. So all this does is legitimizes and keeps evil going. This is the wrong way. The only right way is the real solution, which is moral education. And this requires knowledge of the right way to not fall for false solutions. So all this is doing is trying to make the system less bad, but your bad system is still there. So what you're doing is you're keeping yourself in a cage, a prison of your own making, of your own ignorance, and you can't, quote, reform inherently violent or immoral systems and institutions. It's inherent in the structure, so you're going to reform it, and as good as you can make it, there's still going to be violence and immorality integrated inherently in that system because that's what it's founded on. So the result is you're begging to be a slave. Please keep me enslaved, master. That takes us to attempts to make things better. Revolutions, where you're just revolving back to the start, another false solution. So you're removing the current controllers or dominators, such as was done in America and France and Haiti. But where are those countries now? Oh, they have governments. And maybe things are better for some people who were overtly enslaved in the past, but now you have everyone under greater covert enslavement. So are things better? Relatively, in some areas, things can be better, and then in other areas, well, they're worse. So you're not actually solving the problem. You're just removing the current controllers and dominators, the ones who are more harsh, beating you and murdering you out in the open. Well, now you just have the covert form of enslavement. You never actually address the problem at the source, the root, which is in consciousness and the understanding of morality and rights, and not perpetuating the belief in authority. And the result is, yay, we won! Bring in the new, hopefully better rulers. These ones are going to do things better. That's what the revolutions are. You were just revolving back to where you were, just bringing in new rulers and dominators. So you set up a new authority. You sustain the immoral belief in the legitimacy of authority to control, rule over others, and greater immorality just comes back. So you got rid of some immorality, so you have less immorality, but then your wheel just comes right back around, and you just end up getting more immorality coming back in anyways, because the foundation that you built it upon was an immoral foundation which just was exploited for more power and gain and corruption and immorality. So revolutions are just repeatedly not knowing how the problems are created. And by doing this, when you don't know how the problems are created, you can't prevent it from happening again, and you're stuck on the revolving wheel of suffering. So overall, this is ongoing in the large scale, and we're just revolving back to the start. So globally, overall, we had serfdom. And then things came along like the Magna Carta and constitutions. So we were leaving the greater serfdom, but there was still the lesser serfdom. Right? Back to the slide, 4, 5 or something, where things were overt slavery, and then they got better over time. So we became less serfs. So it was better. We got more freedoms. But what happens is, because these revolutions don't deal with the actual core and consciousness and actually understanding the objective difference between what's morally right and morally wrong, and understanding our natural rights and natural law, well, what you end up happening is stuff like the Greater Reset and the New World Order and Club of Rome and things like that, where there are forces who are again working to return us to greater serfdom. So this is the wheel of the revolution. Yeah, we got the revolutions, we got things that went better, and then they're going to go back down again. That's where we are now. Are they going to go back down? Maybe, maybe not. That depends on us. Are people going to wake up? Are we going to not tolerate this? Are we going to keep accepting it, tolerating it, normalizing it, and standardizing it? Well, let's see. Is the Greater Reset, the New World Order agenda, greater centralized control, top-down control, lockstep, is that going to happen? Looks like they're pushing along, and that it's going to happen. Hopefully it doesn't, but that depends on over here addressing the root, the source, consciousness, knowledge, and first getting the knowledge, such as this presentation and others, other information, books, video, audio, visuals of what is the information on what morality is and what rights are. And then gaining that understanding by processing and truly understanding it and verifying it and reflecting it back to reality. So you have an epistemological foundation of truth. And then we're going to be able to stop perpetuating the belief in authority. And we're not going to support authority. We're not going to support these would-be rulers who are telling us that, oh, they got it figured out, and this is the best way. We got to change things to this new way that's going to be better for you, and it's just going to enslave you more because you're a stupid, gullible idiot who's just going to believe whatever we tell you because we got money. Anyways. Brings us to political representation. And this is to be a representative of the authority of another. So I'm an authority over me, but I'm going to say, oh, well, you can be authority over me. You're my political representative. You're going to represent me, and you're going to be the authority over me now. And that's where people speak and act with authority on behalf of another. That's what politics is. And they make the decisions for the collective. It's not each individual deciding. So you don't represent yourself. You're giving away your own nature to control your own behavior and the power to make decisions that determine your behaviors and how you are going to live your life. You're giving that all away and putting it into someone else's hands. That's a great plan. That's a great way to live life. Oh yeah, that's real authentic. And what happens is you're making people less responsible for their own lives, which is making people irresponsible. Making people into children. Because children are irresponsible. They haven't learned responsibility, and that's what we're kept. We're kept in, as Richard Grove says, extended adolescence. Right? Or extended childhood. Something like that. So we're irresponsible. We're children. We're just children having temper tantrums because we're overall, in the aggregate, in the collective, as a grouping of all individuals together, what's the result? Is overall we're irresponsible. We're like little children, and then we just want to have temper tantrums when they try to up the notch of turn the knob on the level of immorality, enslavement, evil, and wrongs, and they just turn it up a notch, and then we go, oh no, they turned it up a notch. Whoa, my normalcy bias, I don't like that. I gotta oppose that. And then if they back down and they remove it, and then everything goes back to normal. Oh, well, thank God we won there. We got that little blip of an increase in immorality, of wrong, of evil. We squashed that one. We're big winners now. Well, what about the pre-existing condition of enslavement that we're already in? Oh, forget about that. They don't even know that exists. They're not interested. All they cared about was that little blip that they protested and that they fought against. They're completely unaware of the pre-existing condition that had collectively even more enslavement in it than just this latest increase that they're trying to ratchet up to get us to accept and tolerate and normalize and standardize as part of our way of life. So when we accept what they're doing, giving away our power, representation to make decisions, to determine our behaviors and how we're going to live our lives, and we're becoming more irresponsible, we're accepting to be disempowered. We're accepting to be owned. We're accepting to be enslaved. So on the right, you have two versions of this. We can either be responsible people, and we gain the knowledge and understanding of how to live in harmony with others. That is, through natural law, moral truth. It means people know what their rights are. That's what responsible people are. People who know what their rights are. They know right from wrong, which is what morality is. And then they can create true order. But the opposite of that is the counter to that is if we don't do that, well, is this what we're going to do? Because this is what we're doing. Do we want to keep doing this? Keep people ignorant and irresponsible by design. The authority of a group, individuals, the authority of a group or individuals are given unlawful, quote, rights that no one else possess. And we're going to create true order with that? No, impossible. Giving authority to a group or individuals and giving them unlawful rights that no one else possess is not going to give us the thing that we say we want, that we want order, that we want freedom, that we want good, that we want harmony and peace. That's not going to happen. But that's what is happening, because people, what are they doing? Well, they're on the left. They don't want to represent themselves. This is what they're doing. There's a political representation. So long as people vote, this is what they're going to keep getting. They're not going to get order. They're going to keep getting chaos. And this is being a brick in the wall of slavery. Voting, politics, change from within is just being a brick in the wall, building it, keeping that wall up, the wall of slavery, of our prison. Voting is saying, whether you realize it or not, that you want slavery to continue, you want violence, you want to be a slave, you want to be owned. So please don't be that brick in the wall. Do you really want to be part of building this prison? Do you? You just want to be part of that wall that builds a prison around you, that keeps you enslaved? Why? Why go into politics? Why vote? Why think you can change things from within? You're not. You can't reform an inherently violent and immoral systems and institutions. These are their foundations that are built upon immorality and violations of rights. It's not going to happen. So these next slides, the last slides here, we're getting to the end. I actually did them first because I originally was doing a true freedom and slavery presentation, but then it got really too big. And I had started with these in the true freedom and slavery, and then I reworked everything, did the other slides and images, and these ended up going last because these are the actual definitions that I want to get into, and that's what's going to wrap everything up, is finishing off with definitions of slavery and yeah. So the basic dictionary or etymology definition of slavery is a state of servitude, a condition of a slave. So it's a condition of a slave. So what is that condition? What is a slave? According to the dictionary or etymology, a slave is a person who is the chattel or property of another. So they're making a definitive statement of reality. The slave is the chattel or property of another, as if that's the way reality legitimately is. That's how I interpret this, right? So you're the property of another. And the property is a thing subject to ownership. So you're owned. So what is own? Own is to possess, have, or rule, and be in command of, have authority over. And we've already gone through authority. So we've already defined all that, the false notion of authority. You have authority over. You're in command of, in control of, you rule, you possess. And that's what being the property of another of is. That's what a slave is. By the standard definitions, slavery is when there is the condition of being a slave. A slave is when someone is the property of another. Someone owns another and has the authority to rule over them and command them to do certain things or not do certain things. This implies an obligation of obedience on part of the slave. So is this an accurate definition? Can someone actually be the property of another? No. As far as I'm concerned, these definitions are lacking. They're poor definitions that don't accurately reflect the reality of what is a slave, what is slavery. if you're just making if you're not qualifying your declaration that a person is chattel or property of another, and that's what makes them a slave, I find your definition is lacking. You're trying. It's like giving credence and credibility to the concept of slavery. And I just wanted to include this as part of how I went into the previous presentation, part 1 on rights, and defined ownership and property. So you can pause and read that, or go back to the first presentation to get a proper understanding of how this all fits into rights. And so the accurate definition of slavery would be based on how I've previously demonstrated ownership and property. It comes from self-ownership, means only you can own yourself. No legitimate claims of ownership upon another can be made. All claims of ownership upon others is a false claim. The standard definition implies there is such a thing as actual, real, true ownership of another, which is false. Completely false. There is no actual, real, true ownership of another. Otherwise, the definition of a slave would also state that it's a false claim. A false claim of one being the property of another. Not that someone is the property of another. No. It's not that they are the property of another. It's that there's a false claim of one being the property of another. Now that is an accurate definition. We're headed in the right direction of an accurate definition. Right? It's a slave is a person who is claimed to be the chattel or property of another, who has a false claim upon them of being the property or chattel or property of another. It's not that they are, that they're being. See, is, are, being are different. It's all the same word about what is. What is the truth. What is, are, be. It's the same verb in different tenses. So what is your being is not that you are a slave. Just because someone claims you are a slave, you're not. Your being, your state of being isn't a slave. Your current condition is that of being a slave. Sure. So maybe I'm getting into semantics here, but wouldn't it be so much, my point is that wouldn't it be so much more accurate if they defined a slave as someone who has the claim of ownership upon them of being the property? That it's only a false claim? A person who has the false claim of being the property of another? To me, that would make so much more sense to have that, rather than just declare, oh, well, the slave is a person who is the property. What do you mean they are the property of another? That can't happen. It's impossible. They can make that claim, and they can use their power and their abuse of physical force as violence, which I've gone into the previous presentation on rights, difference between force and violence. So they're abusing the power and force as violence in order to violate people's rights, and they're making a false claim of being a slave. But there is no such thing as an actual slave in truth. So that's my point of what I'm saying, that the definitions, I find that they're lacking, that they could convey the reality. And that's what definitions are supposed to convey. They're supposed to convey reality. So this is my gripe with definitions, that things should be defined more accurately. It's not that someone is a slave, it's that there's a false claim of ownership upon them. So therefore, slavery is the condition of false claims of ownership being made upon another, or others. But there is more to it than that. The standard definition only refers to the enslavement of your body, visualized, historically, as people in chains, with whips to keep them in line, etc. But slavery has a larger scope of application than that of overt chattel slavery. See, once again, another point of the definition is inaccurate. Once you understand what rights are, objectively, truly, in truth, in nature, well, you can see how even their definition of slave, even if they had the qualifier, a false claim of being the property of another, well, it's not a chattel or property of another. It's that it's more nuanced than that, because they're not explaining that the only image that this is going to invoke in someone's consciousness, in their mind's eye, in their internal reality, is that, oh, well, that's people in chains. But a slave is a person who is the chattel or property of another. Oh, that's when you own someone, you have them in chains, they're on your plantation or whatever, you lock them in your basement, they're in chains and they can't escape. Oh, that's the only type of slavery there is. So that's my second gripe, my point of contention about how slavery is defined, which was like the whole earlier part of the presentation, explaining how that's a misconception. So to continue with an accurate explanation of the definition of slavery, slavery can exist in degrees of severity. Overt chattel slavery with people in chains isn't the only kind of slavery that can exist. Covert slavery is all around us. You own yourself, this is self-ownership, and can exercise your natural rights over your rightfully acquired property through original appropriation or voluntary exchange according to your will as you see fit. So you can exercise your natural rights over your rightfully acquired property according to your will as you see fit, so long as you don't infringe on the rights of others, which means you're not initiating harm to them. Anyone trying to stop you from living according to your rights is claiming the false, quote, right to decide what you can or can't rightfully do with your property, with your rightful property, either original appropriation of resources in nature or voluntary exchange of others who have originally appropriated things in nature or gained things themselves through voluntary exchange and then continue that cycle of voluntary exchange. So what you can or can't rightfully do, anyone trying to stop you from living according to your rights is claiming the false, quote, right to decide what you can or can't rightfully do with your property, which is a false claim of ownership to control your property. They're making a claim of ownership to control your property by controlling you, saying that they can decide what you can or can't do with your rightful, lawful, morally acquired property. That's what this is all about. It's all morality. So I'll just say your morally acquired property, rightful property. They're making a claim of ownership of what you can do with your property, which is making a claim of ownership on your actions, and your actions come from your body. They're claiming to control, being allowed or having the right to control your body, which is, I've already explained all of that in this presentation and partially in the previous one on rights, part 1 on rights. False claims of ownership on any rightful property, any morally acquired property, is a claim of ownership on you. That is to say, slavery, because all your property derives from your first natural right of self-ownership to rightfully acquire it and freely choose what you do with it. And here's another slide from the first presentation, which essentially just said that in the paragraph, briefly explains it. So you can go back and take a look at that, go listen to it if you want more elucidation into expounding upon these details. So the 7 thefts, these 7 thefts, murder, rape, assault, coercion, duress, theft, murder, rape, assault, coercion/duress, theft, trespass, or willfully lying deception, which is a fraud. These are the 7 thefts. And all 7 thefts are violations of your free will and what you choose to do with your rightful, morally acquired property. Coercion is the general theft of your free will by threats of other violence, such as murder, rape, assault, standard theft, or trespass, to influence you to accept another lesser theft to your property. So, you're going to coercion, give me your money or I'll beat you up. Give me your money or I'll take your life. Well, that's using coercion, the theft of your free will choice, to say what you want or act the way you want that doesn't initiate harm to others. You're going to accept the coercion so that you don't receive a violation of your bodily integrity or of your life. So you're going to Stealing your life is a greater violation than stealing the fruits of your labor. So you're going to accept taxation because you don't want them to throw you in a cage or murder you when you defend yourself for them trying to throw you in a cage. And that's the slavery we live in. So we accept the perpetual coercion, which is duress. We accept the duress in our lives, that immorality, that theft of our free will, because we don't want greater severity of violations to be done upon us. They got their own standing army who follows their orders and believes in all this nonsense, lunacy, degenerate belief. And until we stand together and act in unison, well, it's going to keep being this way. Because you're just one person who's going to stand up against their army, and you're going to get squashed. So if you want to eventually get to the point where things change, well, we need to educate others to get them on the same page so that we can actually unite. Because we're only going to unite when we're on the same moral level. And other people can be at higher moral levels, but we need the same basic moral level of understanding of our rights and acting together to uphold them and defend them and not allow other people to deny them and subjugate us. So until we get to that point, well, sorry, we're going to keep being violated. We're going to keep being enslaved. No matter how much you want to extricate yourself and be an independent contractor and not pay taxes, and you can avert things that way. Well, are you going to the grocery store? Are you buying gas? Because everywhere you go, there's a sale tax, right? You're going to be paying sales tax on stuff. Maybe not on food there, on essential foods, but on other stuff. You're going to be paying sales tax somewhere. So in some way in what you're doing, you're getting enslaved because you're being stolen from by the sales tax. Or if you want to consider that part of the actual price of the product, well, it isn't. That's why there's a sales tax, because there's the actual price, and then you have to calculate your 15% more in the sales tax in my area. So it's like you can't escape the immorality. It's everywhere. We are subjugated into it. I don't think I did a slide for that. It might be in the one on the great work coming in like 7, 8, 6 presentations from now, the 7th or 8th part. I don't know. I'm going to do one on the great work, what it means, why to do it. But we are forced into being immoral. As much as we want to be immoral right now, we can only reach a certain level because of the condition of society that we can't escape, that it's all around us. Because we don't... Oh, I think that's in my True Freedom one. Okay, yeah. Because we don't live on an island. That's the next presentation. Part 3 coming up. We don't live on an island isolated. We interact with others, and that means we're going to interact in this society, and the modality this society operates by, which is enslavement. So you can't escape being forced into the immorality and even supporting it to some extent. Even if you extricate yourself from all the major other ways and paying taxes and other stuff and whatever, you're still going to, in some capacity, you're going to be participating in it in even some minor way, until we can actually unite together to change this way of living and create it into something else, because we all agree that we want it to be that way. And that's where majority rule is the default in nature. It's just whether your majority is operating within the confines, or with the knowledge and understanding of the objective difference between right and wrong, that is to say morality, or not. So if you're a majority not under natural law, well, then you're going to be violating natural law. And if you're a majority under natural law and respecting it and aligning with it and harmonizing with it, then you're going to create a society that way. So the majority rule it's a dual-sided. There's positive and negative to it. But that's just the default of how reality operates. As if we were the majority, the people who want true anarchism, voluntarism, a moral, objective moral way of living in society according to our natural rights, then that would be the default, that would be the condition we have as our society. But currently that's not the way it is, because we are not in the majority, that we are not setting, we don't have the influence of our behavior to make that the default of what reality is in the present. All right, second paragraph. Murder, rape, and assault are violations of your free will to choose what happens to your life, sexual association, or bodily integrity. Standard theft of objects you own are violations of free will to choose what happens to those objects. Each theft is a violation of that particular property, but free will is always being violated. So too is the self or body property. Free will can be seen as the most violated, quote, downstream property one has. And by extension, one can also say that it's the most important, as can the self or body that enacts the free will be regarded as the most important. So the free will is always being violated, and so is the self-body being violated, because ultimately all the other property rights derive from the initial property right of self-ownership and our body and our self that we own. And that's always being violated. Whenever any of the other property violations are done, that's the one that's being violated. I think I mentioned that here. And what I mean by downstream is that downstream? I think I meant upstream. So downstream is like, yeah, I think I meant upstream. Oops, I'll have to correct that. So everything, right, starts with your first natural right of self-ownership, which starts from your body, your life. And that's why all these ones are extensions of your first natural right of self-ownership, which your life belongs to. Your sexual association is part of your self-ownership, your bodily integrity, your free will choice, standard property that you derive through original appropriation or voluntary exchange, the security of your living domain, and the ability to make informed decisions. Well, all that either is in consciousness, and it's ultimately in your body, in yourself, that you own yourself. So it all derives from self-ownership, and it all derives from aspects of you, yourself, and your body. And so since everything is a violation of free will, of what you want to do with your life, your sexual association, bodily integrity, your own free will choice itself, your property that you have appropriated or exchanged, the security of your living domain, or your ability to make decisions, all this has to do with free will. So that's what I was getting at in terms of, it's the most violated downstream property, but I think it's upstream. Things that are downstream come after, and things that are upstream come before. So in that sense, yeah, I think I used the wrong term. That was a last-minute edit before I went and did this recording. I went through all my slides, and that's why I have a few places where I noticed that I made typos. It's just because they were recent edits, and then I didn't reread my edits properly. So this is one that I just added to try to make things clearer, but I used the wrong term. So it's not downstream, it's upstream. Because making informed decisions depends upstream on your free will. The security of your living domain, well, your living domain is obtained with your free will decisions and your actions to procure that area where you live. The standard property you procure is also through your free will choice, the integrity that you want for your body. It all depends on your free will choice, but it also depends on your self-ownership. Self requires a self and requires a body. So these are both upstream. Self and body and free will are upstream properties one has. So by extension, you can say that free will or the self or the body are the most important you have. That's why you can view free will, even though it's not assault or rape or murder to your physical body, it's taking a property you have, right? Property rights, which are freedom, your free will choice is a property you have, a property right you have that's being violated in all these cases. In all these cases, free will choice is being violated. And no matter which violation over here, when your property rights are being violated, there's always free will choice being violated. It's just that coercion explicitly deals only with free will choice, whereas all of these also have free will choice. And all of these also have your body and your life. Because without a body or your life, if you're dead, well, you don't have any of these properties anymore because you're dead, because you don't have a body. You're not there anymore. So that's why I'm saying you can look at free will choice, and you can also look at the self or the body, property, as the most violated and as the most important. So I was just making that argument that you can always look at it as a violation of free will or a violation of your body, which, again, I've explained throughout this presentation that that's ultimately what's happening, is they're making claims, false claims of ownership upon your body, upon you, the self. So what we have to do now is make distinctions in our definition of slavery and enslavement about immoral actions, actions that enslave, and immoral ways of life. An immoral way of life, a way of life that is enslavement, that is slavery, versus an action that temporarily produces a condition of slavery. So an immoral action is an initiation of harm. Other words for initiation of harm are theft, wrong, violence, immorality, evil. They're synonyms. So it's initiating harm at a particular instance in time. At a particular instance in time. And usually the violator doesn't claim they have a, quote, right to do it. Right? Just as some Joe Blow trying to rob you, they're not going to say, oh, I have the right to do this, give me your wallet. No. They're just trying to take what they want and hope to get away with it without negative consequences applied. Well, conversely, some do. The psychopaths, those lacking conscience, they can claim they have a right. Police, psychopaths, politicians, whatever, elites, rulers, masters, those people. They know that if they do get caught, they will likely face negative consequences. Even though some think they won't face any, even if they do get caught. So you can think of, a recent one is Mr. Fraudchi, Mr. I Am the Science, right? From what I can tell from his demeanor, like, he thinks he's untouchable. Maybe he doesn't think that. Maybe he just puts on that facade, but it's like, even if I do get caught, I'm not going to face any serious consequences myself, from me personally. And there's plenty more where that came from. Probably most of the psychopaths. They keep doing it because they think that they can just keep doing wrong and they won't get caught. And even if they do get caught, nothing's going to happen to them. And I guess that's the delusion they derive from their position of power, which creates an insulated bubble of reality where they think of themselves as untouchable. And in many cases that does play out through the court system where they are untouchable. Anyways, so in contrast to an immoral action, we have an immoral way of life. An immoral action, this is an immoral action that is accepted, tolerated, supported, condoned, normalized, or standardized in a given area. The action is applied on a wide scale and is persisted in repeated instances over time, over and over. So this is where an implicit claim is made of having the, quote, right to violate others in perpetuity. That means it doesn't stop. Well, it might stop. The frequency doesn't stop. So your interval of frequency might be every day, every week, every month, every year, but it keeps repeating. It repeats. The instance of an immoral action repeats over and over. You can think of taxes or licensure You have to renew your license, renew your permit, blah, 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 the bureaucracy. You have to keep paying your taxes over and over. So it's not like it's necessarily happening at every moment of the day of your existence, but it repeats over and over and over. It's violating others in perpetuity. The violator or violators isn't worried about facing negative consequences because they have the whole area under control and everyone accepts that control because it's an immoral action that's repeated and it's accepted and tolerated and supported and condoned and normalized and standardized. It's become a standard of the way of that society operates, that your area of where you live, that localized area, that's become a standard of how the way of life is. It's become normalized. It's what is now normal. It's condoned by people. It's supported by people because it's tolerated and accepted as that's the way of life. So it doesn't change. Immorality creates slavery. Temporary versus permanent condition. So this is expounding on the previous one, just to explain again the nuanced difference of something that's temporary versus a permanent condition. So you can look at it as there's immoral actions and then there's an immoral way of life. And that immorality, well, that creates slavery. So you can have slavery as a temporary versus a permanent condition. The temporary creation of slavery is a one-timer, one and done. It happens once, then isn't repeatedly applied. But when it is repeated, slavery persists as a permanent condition instead of a mere temporary condition. It doesn't matter if the thief doesn't want to enslave someone permanently. Their action is an act of slavery, a false claim of ownership upon another's rightful property. The theft is either one instance to take what they want from another, or persisted to keep stealing over and over from another. So like I mentioned, someone just wants your wallet. Well, the thief doesn't want to enslave someone permanently, but their action is still an act of slavery, because in that moment they're claiming, well, I have the right to do this, even if they're not explicitly saying. What they're doing is actually making a false claim of ownership. They're saying, well, what you have, well, I want it, and it's going to be mine to own now. Thank you. Give it to me, or I'm going to hurt you. So then it becomes their property. Then they view it as their property, and they can do what they want with it. So they sell it. They steal your watch, and they go sell it to a pawn shop or whatever. They steal something, and they sell it to someone else. So they're acting as if they own your property. Even though they don't rightfully own it, they're acting as if they're the owner. So they're making a false claim of ownership upon what you have. Even if they're not saying that, when you make a false claim of ownership upon something, you're saying you're making a claim of ownership upon the person, which is trying to enslave them. But it's a particular instance in time. It's one immoral action. You're not subjugating someone to an immoral way of life. So in that claim of ownership upon their rightful property, it can either be in the instance, such as a mugger, or it's persisted stealing repeatedly over time. And that's what government does. That's what the taxation is. The taxation is theft. It's a mugger, over and over, someone mugging you over and over. Every week on your paycheck, they mug you. Versus an individual mugger who just mugs you, and he probably doesn't believe he has it right. He doesn't believe these things, but the actions he's doing are making claims of ownership, because once they appropriate your property unrightfully, wrongfully, not through rightful appropriation of property, well, that act is making a false claim of ownership upon your property, because it's not actually their property. It never is. It's always yours, but they took it from you. So it doesn't matter if they know it or not. What they're actually doing is making a false claim of ownership, which is making a claim, which is an act of enslavement, but it's a temporary one. It's an immoral action at a particular instance, and it's temporary, versus persisting it like the government does. Second paragraph, Accepting and allowing the persistent theft to continue puts you in a condition of enslavement as a way of life. The violating party is being granted a false, quote, right to steal and have ownership over your property. Not saying no is saying yes, though it's not likely that they would stop if you simply said no. So if you're not saying no, for them it's like, oh, well, you're allowing me to do it. But even if you said no, like, no, I'm not paying you taxes. Oh, well, we don't give a shit. Even if the mugger, no, I'm not giving you my wallet. Okay, well then I'm going to shoot you in the leg and I'm going to take your wallet. Or I'm going to shoot you in the head and take it. That's what they're going to do. They don't care. Even if you say no, it doesn't really change anything. It doesn't matter because they're deluded anyways. They're not asking you for permission. They're giving you a command for you to obey. And if you don't obey, they're going to punish you. So it doesn't matter if you say no. But for them, for the deluded mindset, when you don't say no, it's like saying yes, like you're giving them permission. But we're not giving them permission. We aren't giving them permission. Because I could go say no, but my no doesn't matter. The no only matters when it has teeth and has the power of numbers to back it up. That's what I'm getting at the end here. So acting to stop widespread persistent theft against you and or others is the only way to end the condition of living as a slave, where slavery is the way of life, where you're living as a slave, which I've explained in this presentation is what we're under. Occult enslavement. Permanent. It's not temporary, one act, and then it goes away. It's repeated over and over and over. We're living as slaves. It's our way of life. So we have to act to stop the widespread persistent theft against us. That's the only way to end it, or else it keeps going on. And this takes numbers of people acting in unison, in the aggregate. And it's only a permanent condition of life if we let it be that way. It doesn't have to be this way. Certainly doesn't have to be this way. At all. But because in the aggregate, we are not in unison to act under natural law, under moral truth. But we don't have that unity to act against this. So we need to act in unison, well, we need numbers of people. And to get those numbers of people, they need to be morally educated. And that's the importance of the great work. It's to try to explain things in different ways for people, for whatever their predilections and inclinations are for consuming information. And some of them never will, but some of them will. You know, I've received thanks over the years for people, and it's thanked me for the content I've made, and it's helped them, and it's changed their life. And you know, other people who are more popular reach more people. That's the way it works with popularity. If your content reaches more people, you're going to have more people who receive it, and more people are going to be affected, more people are going to be changed, and more people are going to be grateful. But I'm not a networker. I'm not a social person. Yeah, that's not something that I have strength in. But it is what it is, and I just do my part, and I try to take in the information and the knowledge, process it into an understanding, and then put it back out there in a way to try to help others gain the same understanding. And my message and the way I do it is going to be different than the audio, video, or books that I received the information and knowledge originally, that then I processed and verified, and I reflected back onto reality to see that its veracity and demonstrability, to then know epistemologically that what I have is truth, and then I can put out truth to others. And that's what these presentations are. I'm trying to teach natural law, the science of morality, and get more people to understand it by condensing putting all the relevant information into separate topics of presentation to get morality and natural law understood by more people. That's what it takes. Everyone. The more people that do it, the more likely we're going to get the numbers of people to then potentially act in unison in the aggregate, in the collective, as a group of people, to have the majority of us be able to change the condition, even if there's a minority that doesn't get it, that doesn't have moral knowledge, and they're not acting with us in unison. They're just going to go along with it because we're the majority this time. So we're not going to be the minority being enslaved by the majority and their ignorance. We're going to be the majority that's going to create a new way of life, and they're going to benefit from it. But that takes time. It took a lot of time to do this. Slavery. This is the last one, if I'm not mistaken. And just to mention, about getting the information, processing, and putting it out. I could be wrong. I've just done my best from what I see in reality, that I'm reflecting things that I see in reality, that I've been able to verify, that I see demonstrated in the reality. The knowledge I've taken in is reflected. It matches up to what is in reality. And that's what I'm trying to present, is my part in showing that reality is reflective, is representative of this information, this knowledge that I'm putting out to get other people to consume and process it and do their own verification and see the demonstrability of it in reality, to understand that this is how things are. So defining slavery can be summarized as follows. Slavery is a false claim of ownership on others' rightful property, which is theft, in whole or in part. So either all of your property or only a part of your property. A false claim of ownership can be a single act as a one-time occurrence applied to one or many others. That's what we just went over here. Example, a mugger stealing from you, or a business defrauding all their clients. Well, they're gonna do it once, and then they're gonna go out of business eventually, right? Or they do it over until they get found out. I don't know how people. Anyways, it takes, I guess, time to figure out you've been defrauded, but it's not going to go on for a very long time. You're going to get defrauded, and then, if you try to take your money out, well, it's not there. So you got defrauded. So they defrauded all their clients. That's why I put it there, because it's a one-time occurrence of being defrauded. You put your money in once, and then your money got defrauded once. You're not getting paid every week and getting defrauded. You're getting stolen from every week by the government. You're putting, unless you kept putting your money into something, well, then each instance you put it in, well, you're getting defrauded on each instance, but you're the one in control of that. It's not. Anyways, I guess maybe it's not the best example. I'm just realizing that there's a bit of nuance in the specificity of stating a business defrauding all their clients, that it might not be a specific instance in time at like 5 o'clock on Friday night. Everyone got defrauded. Maybe they're doing it recurringly. So, sorry about that. So that's a temporary condition or state of enslavement that subsides. But anyways, usually all defrauding subsides at some point, might last for a few years. Eventually they get found out. It doesn't keep going. Well, in terms of businesses, not in terms of our monetary system, that's been going on for multiple generations. Anyways, apologies for that nuanced example. I guess it's not the most accurate, but the mugger stealing is, because they do it once. And then you meet them again, well, they do it once again. So I guess that's how defrauding can happen. Is they did it once, and then they do it again. But it's not something that repeatedly happens in intervals. Or like duress, which is a persistent state that's always there. Because that's what duress is. Duress just never goes away. It's coercion that's always there. We're perpetually in a state of duress. The more severe form of slavery is when the condition or state is persisted and becomes a permanent facet of life for one or many, which is living as a slave. Example, chattel slavery. That's where you're literally living as a slave in some of the most harsh and severe conditions. Or you're being stolen from perpetually. That could be the theft of property that continues over and over and over and over and over and over and over. And that's what government does. So that's a permanent facet of life where the condition or state of slavery is persisted. So when you have whole societies can be enslaved, which can be defined as follows, which is different, slightly different than the first definition, is a society of slavery is when there is an accepted, persistent, and widespread claim of ownership on others' property in whole or in part. And that's what I was saying here. And here. Right? It's accepted, tolerated, supported, condoned, normalized, or standardized. That's what it is on the whole society. When you have slavery, a whole society of slavery is when there is an accepted, tolerated, supported, condoned, normalized, or standardized, persistent, and widespread claim of ownership on others' property, in whole or in part. So it's not on your whole paycheck, right? It's not on your whole paycheck. It's on part of your paycheck. But it doesn't matter if it's on your whole property, like chattel slavery was, or it's a part of your property. Because here's 100%. So just to tie it in with like the first 2 or 3 slides or whatever it was. It's not 100% of your property. What if it was 99, 98, 97? At what point does it stop mattering and stop becoming slavery? If it's 100% is slavery, is 99.9% not slavery? Is it 99%? Is it 90%? Is it 5%? When it's 5%, it's not slavery anymore? Is it 1%? Is it 0.1% and then it's not slavery anymore? No, those are just degrees of severity. That's the only difference. It wasn't the last one. I was wrong. This is the last one. Officially, this is the last one. I remember. So to conclude this presentation, we have 2 occultations of slavery. The 2 reasons why slavery persists. The 2 hidden aspects of slavery. So first was the whole part of this presentation was explaining the occulted societal enslavement that we have, the covert slavery. And this has to do with the visibility of slavery. So slide number 2 was talking about how most people view slavery, and it's highly visible, the chattel slavery. It's overt, in your face, chains, whippings, ropes, markets to sell people as if people could be owned as property. So that has to do with the visibility. It's a low visibility. This slavery is hidden to most because they don't know it's slavery. That's why they can't see it, because they don't know it. They don't have the definitions. If they had the knowledge, they would see it and could potentially stand against it. This requires the knowledge of the objective difference between morally right and morally wrong behavior. Having conscience, that's what having conscience is to have the knowledge of the objective difference between morally right and morally wrong behavior. So that's the first occulted societal enslavement. The first occultation of slavery is the actual condition of the occulted societal enslavement that we're currently living. And the second occultation of slavery is the occulted knowledge of slavery and morality, which I just mentioned is the reason why the societal enslavement is still occulted and people can't see it. And this knowledge of slavery and morality has to do with knowledge of slavery instead of the visibility. The first one has to do with the visibility of slavery, of being able to see it. And the second one has to do with the knowledge of slavery so that you can see it. Because if you don't even know something is slavery, then you're not even able to see it. And this is the primary reason why humanity is enslaved, the root causal factor. And there are other causal factors for why people are ignorant of this knowledge, such as deliberately such as deliberate engineered suppression of moral knowledge. This is deliberate engineered suppression of moral knowledge. It's out there, but it's not being taught. It's not being shared. The, quote, educational or academic institutions don't teach it, neither does the news, and certainly not the government. Our society is engineered or constructed to confuse moral comprehension, as evidenced by most people who say morality is subjective, not objective. Mark Passio's Tree of Evil shows causes for the ignorance, such as the fear of owning personal responsibility to act on that knowledge. Oh my god, I misspelled Passio. Okay. Lots of misspellings. There's things that I added, like I said, recently, and my mistake, I did not type them out properly. So, probably most people who come across this are familiar with Mark Passio's Tree of Evil that shows causes for ignorance, and one of them is the fear of owning. So you have ignorance at the top, and then just under that is the fear of owning personal responsibility to act on that knowledge, and then there's a cause for that and a cause for the other thing, self-loathing from self-respect, and then parental abandonment. So I wasn't going to get into all that. I'm just saying directly under why we're enslaved is the ignorance, and the ignorance has other factors like the engineered suppression of moral knowledge, and individually it's also people's fear of owning personal responsibility, as expounded upon in the Tree of Evil by Mark Passio. So people can't see occulted societal enslavement because they don't... I missed an apostrophe. Sorry about that. Wow. People can't see occulted societal enslavement because they don't even know what slavery actually means, since that meaning has been occulted and narrowly defined as only the severe enslavement of chattel slavery. Moral knowledge makes occulted slavery apparent. So in order to change this around, to get this unison, right, in the aggregate, we need to be united to act based on the number of people we have. All right, well, to get there, well, slavery has to become visible. And the only way slavery is going to become visible is if people know that it's slavery, and that requires knowledge that it is slavery in order to potentially stand against it. So they have to gain that knowledge of slavery, and that requires moral knowledge, and that requires knowing the objective difference between right and wrong behavior. They need to develop a conscience and actually have a properly developed conscience. And that's what's required. And until that happens, well, we're not going to be free. So moral knowledge makes occulted slavery apparent. And right now, people only see slavery as the severe enslavement of chattel slavery. So if people can see slavery as beyond that overly simplified, overt, in-your-face form, well, then they can maybe actually care, like, whoa, I am enslaved? Oh, well, now I'm going to care. Because right now they don't care because they don't see themselves as enslaved. They just accept the various levels of injustices that they can see. Like, a lot of people don't want to pay taxes and blah, blah, blah. And they don't like licensure and prohibition and all that and mandates. But they don't see it as enslavement. But I think if they did see it as enslavement, they'd be a lot more... It'd be a larger affront to... I'll switch. That's the last one here. Right? Yeah, that's the last one. All right. We'll switch over back to... I guess I can just keep it here. Oh, we can go to this one. So yeah. Lost my train of thought, but basically, thank you very much. I guess I could go here. Thank you for your time and attention. If you want to get more information related to truth, falsity, human consciousness, how it works, how we learn, how we think, thinking better, reflecting things on reality, different concepts of alchemical change, becoming a better person, caring about truth, immorality, evil, that type of thing. Well, check out evolveconsciousness.org. And yeah, my tagline for my site's always been Truth Unites, Lies Divide, Embrace Truth, and Care for Truth. Hope you gain value from the presentation, and see you next time for part 3 and all the other parts to come. Take care. Peace.